This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never told this story to many people, and those I have told usually look at me like I'm either making it up or I'm crazy. Maybe I am crazy. That's something I've questioned my entire life. But what happened in my family feels too real to ignore, too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. I grew up in Willowhaven, a small town where everyone knows everyone. It's the kind of place where the most exciting thing to happen is when the grocery store gets a new shipment of ice cream flavors. But beneath that ordinary surface, my family has always been different. We see things. We know things before they happen, and it's terrifying. It started with my mom, Sarah. She was the most normal, down-to-earth person you could imagine, a third-grade teacher who baked cookies every Sunday and volunteered at the animal shelter, but she had these moments where she'd just know things. I remember when I was about 8, Mom started having nightmares about snakes. Not just one nightmare, but the same dream night after night for weeks. She'd wake up screaming, saying she could feel them slithering across her skin. Dad thought it was just stress from work. I remember him saying, "Sarah, honey, you're just overworked. Maybe you need a vacation." But Mom was convinced it meant something. "They're in the house, Marcus," she kept saying. "I can feel them." Dad finally gave in and checked the attic, probably just to humor her. I'll never forget the look on his face when he came downstairs. He was pale, his hands shaking. "Call pest control," was all he said. They found a nest of snakes in our attic, not just one or two, 27 of them. The pest control guy said they'd probably been there for months, breeding. He couldn't believe none of us had noticed sooner. But Mom knew. Somehow she knew. That was my first real experience with whatever this ability or curse is that runs in our family. But it wasn't the last. The most haunting premonition Mom ever had was about apples. It started so innocently. She'd flinch whenever she saw an apple. Then she started throwing them away, refusing to have them in the house. She'd get this faraway look in her eyes and tell me, "Don't bite the apple, Amelia. Promise me." It got to where she'd make these references to Snow White and the poison apple, or Eve in the Garden of Eden. I was 12 by then, and I thought she was just being weird. I even made fun of her for it once, taking a big, dramatic bite of an apple right in front of her at dinner. I still feel guilty about that because she burst into tears and ran from the room. 2 weeks later, Mom collapsed at school. Brain aneurysm, the doctors said. She fell into a coma, and for a month we sat by her bed waiting for her to wake up. She never did. After she died, I found an apple-shaped paperweight shattered on her desk at home, like she'd thrown it against the wall. The date on her calendar showed she'd broken it the morning before she collapsed. Don't bite the apple. She knew something was coming for her. My great-grandmother Dorothy had it too. When I was really little, maybe 5 or 6, we visited her at the nursing home. She kept looking past us at the empty corner of the room, smiling and nodding. When Mom asked what she was looking at, Great-Grandma Dorothy said, "Oh, it's just Frank. He's come to get me." Frank was her husband who died 15 years earlier. The nurses told us this was normal, that many elderly patients have hallucinations near the end, but the way Great-Grandma described him, the blue shirt with the coffee stain on the collar that he'd gotten the morning of his death, the way his reading glasses were perched on top of his head, it was too specific. Mom recognized those details instantly. Great-Grandma died in her sleep that night. The nurses found her with a peaceful smile on her face. Dad had it too, though he fought against it harder than anyone. He was a contractor, practical to his core, always looking for the logical explanation. But even he couldn't explain away what happened with his cousin Steve. We were eating dinner one night. I was about 9, when Dad suddenly dropped his fork and fell to his knees, clutching his chest. Mom rushed to him, thinking he was having a heart attack, but he kept saying, "Steve, something's happened to Steve." 5 minutes later, the phone rang. Dad's aunt was calling to tell us that cousin Steve had just been killed in a car accident. His truck had been T-boned by a drunk driver at exactly the time Dad fell to his knees in our kitchen. Dad never talked about it afterward. He just started working longer hours, coming home exhausted so he wouldn't have to think. My own first experience happened when I was barely 3 years old, though I remember it with unnerving clarity. We were driving to my grandmother's house for Thanksgiving. Traffic slowed to a crawl, and I could see flashing lights ahead. There had been an accident. A semi-truck had crushed a car so badly you could barely tell it had been a car at all. As we inched past the wreckage, I started screaming and crying, "Aunt Kelly! Aunt Kelly!" Mom tried to calm me down, saying, "No, honey, Aunt Kelly is at Grandma's waiting for us. That's not her." But I wouldn't stop. I kept screaming that it was Aunt Kelly in the car, that she was hurt. Mom ended up having to pull over because I was so hysterical. She kept telling me it was just a scary accident and that Aunt Kelly was fine. When we finally got to Grandma's house, everyone was gathered in the living room, some of them crying. The phone call had just come in. Aunt Kelly had been in an accident on her way to Grandma's. Her car had been crushed by a semi-truck. She died instantly. Mom went white as a sheet when she heard. She looked at me with this expression I'll never forget, fear mixed with realization. That was the day she understood I had it too. Growing up with this gift has been, I don't even know how to describe it. Imagine constantly questioning your own sanity. Imagine being afraid to trust your instincts because you don't know if what you're feeling is a normal human emotion or some kind of supernatural warning. After Mom died, these feelings only intensified. I'd get these overwhelming sensations, a metallic taste in my mouth before bad news, a buzzing in my ears before accidents, a heavy feeling in my stomach before someone would get sick. I learned to hide it because the few times I tried to warn people, they looked at me like I was crazy. When I was 16, I started getting headaches whenever I was around my best friend Zoe. Not just normal headaches, blinding pain that made me throw up. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was just stress from exams, but it got so bad I had to stop hanging out with her. A month later, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor. She survived, thankfully, but she never really forgave me for abandoning her when she needed a friend the most. How could I explain that being near her physically hurt me because some part of me knew she was dying? The worst part isn't the premonitions themselves, it's the helplessness. Knowing something bad is coming, but not knowing exactly what or how to stop it. It's like watching a horror movie where you want to scream at the character not to go into the basement, except it's real life, and sometimes you're the one being pushed toward the basement by forces you don't understand. Last year, I started having dreams about water, not peaceful, gentle water, dark, suffocating water filling my lungs. I'd wake up gasping for air, convinced I was drowning. This went on for weeks. I started avoiding showers, taking baths instead. I canceled a beach trip with friends. I was terrified of water. Then my dad called to tell me he'd booked a surprise fishing trip for us, something we used to do when I was little before Mom died. I tried to make excuses, but he sounded so excited. It had been years since I'd seen him that happy. How could I say no? The whole drive to the lake, I felt like I was going to throw up. Dad kept talking about the new fishing gear he'd bought, how perfect the weather was, how this was going to be just like old times. I nodded and smiled, but inside I was screaming. When we got to the dock, Dad went to rent the boat while I waited with our gear. There was an older man sitting on a bench nearby reading a newspaper. He kept looking at me, and finally he said, "You know, young lady, sometimes the things we fear most aren't what we think they are." I was startled. "Excuse me?" "The water," he said, nodding toward the lake. "It's not always literal." Before I could ask what he meant, Dad returned with the keys to our rental boat. The old man was gone when I turned back. I have no idea where he went so quickly. We spent the day fishing. Nothing happened. No accidents, no storms, no near-drowning experiences. For the first time in my life, it seemed like one of these feelings was wrong. I started to relax, even enjoy myself. Dad and I talked more than we had in years. He told me stories about Mom I'd never heard before, about how they met, how nervous he was on their first date, how he knew she was the one the moment he saw her. As the sun started to set, we headed back to shore. Dad seemed lighter somehow, like he'd set down a heavy burden he'd been carrying. He smiled at me, a real smile that reached his eyes, and said, "This was good, Amelia. We should do this more often." That night, back at Dad's house, I had the best sleep I'd had in weeks. No drowning dreams, no waking up gasping for air. I thought maybe I'd broken the cycle, that maybe these premonitions weren't as reliable as I'd feared. The next morning, I found Dad sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a letter. His hands were shaking. "Dad?" I said. "What's wrong?" He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "My doctor called yesterday morning before our trip. I have stage 4 lung cancer. It's already spread to my lymph nodes. They're giving me 6 months. Water in my lungs, not drowning. Cancer. The fluid that would eventually fill his lungs and take him from me, just like it had taken his father and his grandfather. That was 8 months ago. Dad's still fighting, still with us, defying the doctor's timeline through sheer stubbornness, but he's getting weaker every day. The hospice nurse comes 3 times a week now. Sometimes I catch him looking at something, or someone, in the corner of the room that I can't see, and I wonder if great-grandma's Frank has come for him too. Last week I started smelling smoke everywhere I go, not cigarette smoke or wood smoke, the acrid chemical smell of electrical fire. I've checked my apartment, my car, my office, nothing. But the smell follows me, gets stronger every day. I don't know what it means yet. I don't know if I want to know. All I know is that this thing, this ability or curse or whatever it is, has been in my family for generations, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. Sometimes I wonder if these premonitions are warnings meant to help us avoid tragedy, or if they're just cruel glimpses of a fate we can't escape. Either way, I've stopped fighting them. They're part of who I am, part of who we are. The smoke smell is getting stronger now. I can taste it on the back of my tongue. Something's coming. I just wish I knew what. Story 2. I never thought I'd be sharing this. It's been over 15 years, but sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still find myself wondering if she's there, watching over me. I was 8 years old when my mom got sick. It started with a doctor's appointment she tried to hide from me. I remember her on the phone in the kitchen, voice hushed, thinking I couldn't hear. But our Fairview house was small, and sound carried. "Stage 3, she whispered. I didn't know what that meant then. The changes came gradually at first. Mum started wearing scarves to cover her thinning hair. She'd get tired halfway through our Saturday baking sessions. Then the hospital visits became more frequent, and each time she'd come home looking a little more hollow. By winter, they'd moved a hospital bed into our family room. Dad said it was just for a while until Mom got stronger. But I knew that was a lie. Even at 8, I could feel the heaviness in our house, like all the air had turned to syrup. Mom tried to keep things normal. She'd help me with homework from her bed, and we'd watch cartoons together on Saturday mornings. But her voice got weaker, and sometimes she'd fall asleep mid-sentence. The first time I felt it was on a Tuesday afternoon. I was lying next to Mom in her hospital bed, careful not to disturb the tubes running into her arm. She was asleep, breath shallow, when the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Not in a scary way. It was more like when you step into shade on a hot day. A relief. I felt something brush against my shoulder, not a touch exactly, more like the awareness of someone standing close. I turned, expecting to see Dad, but there was no one there. Just the faded yellow wallpaper Mom had always meant to replace. "Did you feel that?" I whispered to Mom, but she didn't stir. It happened again the next day, and the day after. Always when I was close to Mom. Always that same cool presence, hovering just at the edge of my vision. I should have been scared, but I wasn't. It felt familiar somehow. One night, as Dad was tucking me in, I told him about it. "I think someone's watching us, Dad." He froze, toothbrush hanging from his mouth. He'd been so distracted lately, sometimes brushing his teeth in my room while saying goodnight, forgetting he'd started the task elsewhere. "What do you mean, Soph?" "When I'm with Mom, someone's there. I can feel them." I expected him to tell me I was imagining things. Instead, he sat heavily on my bed, the springs creaking under his weight. "Your grandmother, your mom's mom, she used to say that those we love never really leave us." His voice was rough. "Maybe she's checking in on your mom, on both of you." I'd never met my grandmother. She died before I was born. But Mom kept her photo on our mantle, a woman with the same dark hair and crooked smile as Mom. "You're not scared?" Dad asked. I shook my head. "It feels warm, like a hug without arms." He gave me a strange look then, like I'd said something both wonderful and terrible at the same time. The presence became more pronounced as Mom got sicker. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night with the certainty that someone was standing in my doorway. I'd see nothing but shadows, yet somehow I knew they were watching over me. 3 months after they moved the hospital bed in, Mom went to the hospice center. Dad said it was just for a few days, so the doctors could help with her pain, but I knew, I think we all knew. The hospice smelled like artificial lemons and something else underneath, something I couldn't name then, but now recognize as ending. Mom's room had big windows that looked out onto a garden, but the blinds were always half closed because the light hurt her eyes. The last time I saw her, her skin was yellow and stretched tight over her bones. She couldn't talk much, but she held my hand, her fingers cold and light as bird bones. "I'll always be with you, Sophia," she whispered. Always. She died that night. Dad woke me before sunrise, his eyes red and swollen. He didn't have to say it. I could feel the change in the air, like something essential had been removed from the world. The first few weeks after were a blur of casseroles from neighbors and relatives speaking in hushed tones. I went through the motions, school, homework, dinner, but everything felt muted, like I was underwater. Dad tried his best. He learned to French braid my hair for school pictures. It was terrible, but I never told him. He packed my lunches with little notes like Mom used to, his handwriting blocky and unsure compared to her flowing script. But at night, I'd hear him crying in his bedroom, muffled sobs he thought I couldn't hear. I cried too, but only in the shower where the water could wash away the evidence. I didn't want Dad to worry more than he already did. One night, about a month after we lost Mom, I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling. My room felt empty and cold, despite the spring warmth outside. I hugged Mom's cardigan to my chest, the soft blue one she wore on Sundays. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, something floral and light. "I miss you," I whispered to the darkness. "I miss you so much it hurts." I must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing I knew, I was waking to the sensation of someone tucking my hair behind my ear. It was something Mom always did. She said she liked to see my face. Half asleep, I opened my eyes, and there she was. Not solid, not exactly, more like the idea of her outlined in the faintest blue light, but it was her face, her smile. I felt warmth spread through me, starting where her fingers, or what felt like fingers, had brushed my ear. "Mom," I whispered. She didn't speak, but her smile widened, and I felt a pressure on my forehead like a kiss. I wasn't scared. I should have been, I know that now. But in that moment, all I felt was a crushing relief. She was still here. She hadn't left me. I drifted back to sleep, and when I woke the next morning, I wondered if it had been a dream. But my hair was tucked neatly behind my ear, and the blue cardigan I'd been clutching was now draped carefully over my desk chair, as if someone had folded it and placed it there. I didn't tell Dad. I thought about it, but something held me back. It felt private, a secret between Mom and me. The next few years were hard. Dad and I muddled through, learning how to be a family of 2 instead of 3. I hit my growth spurt at 10 and suddenly all my pants were too short. Dad had no idea how to shop for a growing girl, so Aunt Linda would take me sometimes, but it wasn't the same. I wanted Mom to be there, to tell me which colors looked best with my skin, to warn me away from the shorts that were too short or the tops that were too grown up. Through it all, I felt her presence occasionally. Never as clear as that first night, but in small ways. A whiff of her perfume when I opened my closet. The sensation of someone sitting on the edge of my bed when I was sick with the flu. Little things that could be explained away, but I knew better. When I was 12, I had my first real fight with Dad. He'd started dating again. A woman from his office named Diane. She was nice enough, always brought me little gifts and never tried too hard to be my friend. But that day she'd referred to herself as bonus mom while talking to her sister on the phone, and I lost it. I screamed at Dad, told him he was betraying Mom, that he was trying to replace her. I said horrible things I didn't mean, then slammed my bedroom door so hard a picture fell off the wall and cracked. I threw myself on my bed and sobbed until my throat was raw. Eventually, the tears stopped, and I just lay there, hiccuping occasionally, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars Mom and I had stuck to my ceiling years ago. That's when I heard it. 3 soft taps on my door. Tap, 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 Mom's knock. She'd always done that when I'd shut myself in my room after an argument or a bad day at school. 3 gentle taps. Then she'd wait for me to let her in. I sat up so fast I got dizzy. Mom, I whispered. Tap, 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 again. I scrambled off the bed and rushed to the door, yanking it open with enough force to make it bounce against the wall. The hallway was empty, but a cold draft washed over me, raising goosebumps on my arms, and with it came that familiar scent. Her scent. Mom, I said, not a question this time. I miss you. I'm sorry I yelled at Dad. I don't really mind, Diane. I wish you were here. The cold intensified for a moment, wrapping around me like an embrace. Then it was gone, leaving me standing alone in my doorway, tears drying on my cheeks. I apologized to Dad the next morning. I told him I was glad he'd found someone who made him happy. I didn't mention the knocking, or the cold draft, or the feeling of being hugged by nothing, but I think he understood something had changed. The last time I felt Mom's presence in our Fairview house was the day we moved out. I was 14 and Dad had gotten a job in another state. Diane was coming with us. They'd gotten married in a small ceremony the previous summer. I was in my empty bedroom doing one final check to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. The walls were bare, the closet empty. It didn't feel like my room anymore. I guess this is goodbye, I said to the empty air. I don't know if you can leave here. If you can, you're welcome to come with us. But if this is where you need to stay, I understand. The air didn't change. No cold spot, no familiar scent. For a moment I thought maybe I'd imagined it all over the years, a child's way of coping with loss. Then, as I turned to leave, I felt it. The lightest touch on my shoulder, like someone giving me permission to go. I haven't felt her presence since we left that house. Sometimes I drive by when I'm visiting old friends in Fairview. New people live there now, a young couple with twin toddlers. They've painted the door red and planted different flowers in the front garden. I often wonder if they feel it too, the watchful presence, the occasional cold spot, the sense that they're not quite alone. I hope they do. I hope they find it comforting, as I did. I'm 23 now. Life has moved on in the way it always does. But sometimes, on particularly hard days or moments of great joy, I still talk to her. I don't expect an answer anymore, but I like to think she's listening wherever she is. And maybe someday, when I need her most, I'll feel my hair being tucked behind my ear, or hear those 3 gentle taps on my door. Tap, 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 Mom's knock. Letting me know she's still there, still watching, still loving me, even after death. Story 3: I've never told this story to anyone besides my therapist and a couple close friends over the years. It's been 10 years, but I still get chills thinking about it. I was 16 then, living in a pretty rundown neighborhood in Sacramento with my boyfriend. I'll call him 6 for privacy. his older brother, the brother's girlfriend, and their mom and her boyfriend. It wasn't exactly an ideal living situation, but when you're young and think you're in love, you make questionable choices. The house was this old two-bedroom with thin walls and creaky floors. Six and I shared the smaller bedroom, which barely fit a full-size bed and a dresser. The window faced the street, and at night the street light would cast this weird orange glow through the blinds. I remember the way shadows would stretch across the wall when cars drove by. Six's mom and her boyfriend were hardly ever around. They'd disappear for days at a time doing who knows what. The brother and his girlfriend were usually out partying or staying with friends. So most nights it was just me and Six in that empty house, which was fine by me. We'd watch movies on his tiny TV, make ramen noodles, and just hang out. Six worked the graveyard shift at this warehouse about 15 minutes away. He'd usually leave for work between 11:30 at night and 1 in the morning, depending on his schedule. I hated being alone in that house at night. The neighborhood wasn't great, and every little noise would freak me out. But I was used to it after a few months. This particular night happened in the middle of summer. It was hot as hell, even with all the windows open. Six had the late shift and needed to leave around midnight. I remember lying in bed watching him get ready for work. He was putting on his uniform, this navy blue shirt with his company logo and some heavy-duty work pants. The ceiling fan was spinning above us, but it just pushed the hot air around. "Don't wait up," he told me before kissing me goodbye. "I'll be back around 8. I nodded, already half asleep. It was too hot to do anything but lie there with just a sheet over me. I heard him grab his keys, walk down the hallway, and lock the front door behind him. The house creaked as it settled into that late-night silence. I eventually drifted off to sleep with my back facing the bedroom door, the way I always slept when Six wasn't there. I'm not sure how long I was asleep before I felt it. The mattress dipped at the foot of the bed, like someone sitting down. My eyes fluttered open, still heavy with sleep. Through the dim orange glow from the streetlight, I could make out what looked like Six's silhouette sitting at the edge of the bed. I remember feeling confused and a little annoyed. "Why aren't you at work?" I mumbled, my voice thick with sleep. He didn't answer. He just smiled at me. Even in the dim light, I could see his face clearly enough to notice his smile. But something was off about it. It was too wide, too forced. His teeth seemed too bright in the darkness. I remember thinking he was just messing with me, so I rolled my eyes and turned away, pulling the sheet up higher. "Whatever, you're gonna be late," I mumbled, already drifting back to sleep. A few moments later, I felt the mattress shift again. This time, I felt someone lie down under the sheets beside me, an arm wrapped around my waist, and I felt myself being pulled across the bed. The weird thing, the thing that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it, was that I didn't feel anyone's body against my back. The arm was there, pulling me, but there was nothing solid behind me. I was still half asleep and assumed it was Six, that maybe he'd called in sick or his shift had been cancelled, so I just let myself be moved and fell back asleep. The heat in the room was suffocating, but I remember feeling a strange coldness where that arm was wrapped around me. I woke up with a start when the bedroom door opened. Sunlight was streaming through the blinds, and there was Six, still in his work uniform, looking tired after his night shift. He tossed his keys on the dresser and started taking off his work boots. "Morning," he yawned. "God, it's already so hot." I sat up, confused. "What do you mean morning? When did you leave again?" Six gave me a weird look. "What are you talking about? I'm just getting home from work." My stomach dropped. "But you came back last night. You were sitting on the bed." He frowned. "No, I didn't. I was at work all night. Ryan can vouch for me. We had lunch break together at 3 a.m. "But I saw you," I insisted, starting to feel panicky. "You sat on the bed and smiled at me. Then you got in bed and pulled me over." Six sat down beside me, concern etching his face. "Maddie, I swear I wasn't here. I drove straight to work after I left and didn't come back until just now." That's when real fear started creeping in. I described exactly what had happened. The weight on the mattress, the smile, the arm around my waist pulling me across the bed with nothing solid behind me. With each detail, Six's expression grew more troubled. Maybe it was just a really vivid dream, he suggested, but I could tell he was freaked out too. But it wasn't a dream. I know the difference between dreams and reality. When you dream about physical sensations, they're never quite right. This was real. I felt the mattress dip. I felt the arm around my waist. I saw his face, or what looked like his face, smiling at me in that unnatural way. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how wrong that smile had been. Six has this crooked smile that pulls up higher on the right side. The thing that smiled at me had a perfectly symmetrical grin that stretched too wide across its face. Six's eyes crinkle at the corners when he smiles genuinely. This thing's eyes were just empty. I couldn't stop shaking. Six tried to comfort me, but I could tell he was disturbed too. He checked all the doors and windows. Everything was still locked from the inside. Nobody could have entered the house without a key. That day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Six stayed home with me, but I jumped at every little noise. When night came again, I refused to sleep in that room. We crashed on the couch in the living room with all the lights on. Six tried to convince me it was just a hypnagogic hallucination, something that happens in that space between wakefulness and sleep. But here's the thing that's always bothered me. If it was just a hallucination, how did I end up on the other side of the bed? When I go to sleep, I don't move much. Six always used to joke that I sleep like a log. But that morning, I woke up on his side of the bed, not mine. Something had physically pulled me across the mattress. Over the next few days, I convinced myself it was just a weird sleep phenomenon. We moved on, didn't talk about it much, but I never slept facing away from the door again. I always made sure I could see the entire room, and I kept a flashlight by the bed. We moved out of that house a couple months later. Six and I eventually broke up after I turned 18, but we stayed friends. Years later, I brought it up again, wondering if he remembered. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I remember. I never told you this, but that same week, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw someone who looked exactly like you standing in the hallway outside our bedroom. I called your name, and when they turned around," he shuddered. "It wasn't you. It had your face, but the expression was all wrong. I blinked, and it was gone." We never experienced anything like that again after moving out of that house. Sometimes I wonder if there was something in that place, something that could look like the people you know but couldn't quite get the details right. Or maybe it was something that knew exactly what it was doing, wearing familiar faces to get close to us. I still think about that arm around my waist sometimes, pulling me across the bed with nothing solid behind me. The memory of that too wide smile in the dark still makes me sick to my stomach. It felt so real. The weight on the mattress, the cold touch, the physical sensation of being moved. Whatever it wasn't Six, and it definitely wasn't human. To this day, I sleep with my back against the wall and never facing away from the door. Some fears you just don't outgrow, even when you can't explain them. I've researched doppelgangers, sleep paralysis, and every other explanation I could find, but nothing quite fits what happened that night. Whatever it was that pretended to be Six, I hope I never encounter anything like it again. Story 4. I still get chills every time I think about that house on Glenwood Avenue in Owasso. Even now, almost 20 years later, I can't talk about it without feeling like I'm being watched. I was only 8 when my mom Pat decided we should move in with my great-grandmother Emily. My parents had just divorced, and we needed somewhere to stay while Mom got back on her feet. The house itself was nothing special from the outside, just an old 2-story home built sometime in the 1930s with peeling white paint and those weird decorative shutters that don't actually close. What I didn't know then was that great-grandma Emily wasn't moving out because she was getting too old to maintain it. She was escaping. The first few weeks were pretty normal. I shared a room with my stepsister Sandy, who was 11 at the time. We'd stay up late talking about school and which boys we thought were cute, normal kid stuff. But then things started to change. It was a Tuesday night in October when Sandy shook me awake around 2 in the morning. Her face was pale and she was trembling. "Charlotte," she whispered, "look at the closet." I remember the absolute terror that washed over me when I turned and saw them. Two glowing red eyes, just floating there in the darkness of our open closet. They weren't animal eyes. They were too big, too round, and they had this horrible awareness to them, like they knew we were looking back. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. We just lay there frozen until Sandy reached over and grabbed my hand so hard it hurt. After what felt like forever, the eyes slowly faded away. The next morning, we told Mom what happened. She looked concerned but tried to brush it off as a nightmare or our imagination, but I could tell she was worried. That's when she finally told us about Great-Grandma Emily's experiences in the house. Emily used to tell me stories about this place, Mom said, stirring her coffee nervously. Said she'd hear footsteps in the hallway at night when nobody was there. Doors would open and close on their own. She thought it was just the house settling. What Mom didn't tell us then, but I found out years later, was that there were rumors about the previous owner, some man who had hanged himself in the basement back in the 50s. I guess she didn't want to scare us more than we already were. That same week, I noticed something on the wall near the staircase. The drywall was crumbling a bit, and there were these black hairs growing out of it. Not just one or two, dozens of them. They weren't like normal human hairs either. They were coarse and stiff, almost like wire. When I showed Mom, she immediately cut them off with scissors and patched the wall, but they grew back within days. The worst incident with Mom happened about a month after we moved in. She was cleaning under my brother James's bed when suddenly she started screaming. James and I ran into the room to find her scrambling away from the bed, her face white as a sheet. "Something grabbed me," she kept saying. It had my ankles and was shaking me. Later that night I saw the bruises, 5 distinct finger marks on each of her ankles, deep purple against her skin. They weren't the kind of marks you could make yourself, and they definitely weren't there before. After that, Mom started sleeping with the lights on. We all did. I was having my own experiences too. The kitchen, especially the area near the basement door, became a place I refused to enter alone. There was a tall black figure that would stand there sometimes, not like a shadow, but like a person made of darkness. It was huge, at least 7 feet tall, with this unnatural thinness to it. I'd see it from the corner of my eye, and when I turned to look directly at it, it would be gone. One afternoon when I was playing in the living room, I saw it step out from the kitchen and just watch me. I screamed so loud that our neighbor came over to check if everything was okay. Mom told her I'd just seen a spider. The figure started appearing more frequently after that. Sometimes I'd wake up at night and it would be standing in the doorway of our bedroom, just staring. I'd pull the covers over my head and pray for morning. Sandy saw it too, though she didn't talk about it much. I'd catch her staring at empty corners of rooms, her face tense with fear. Once, while we were brushing our teeth, she suddenly froze and whispered, "It's behind us." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. We just kept brushing, tears streaming down our faces until we felt like we could move again. The situation got so bad that Mom eventually moved us out temporarily to stay with her sister in Lansing. We lived there for almost a year, and during that time, I didn't have a single nightmare, no red eyes, no black figure, just normal kid problems. But then Mom lost her job, and we couldn't afford to stay with my aunt anymore. The house on Glenwood was still ours, and with nowhere else to go, we moved back in when I was almost 10. It was worse the second time around, much worse. The first night back, all the lights in the house went out at exactly 3:15 in the morning. We checked the breaker box, but nothing was tripped. The power company said there were no outages in the area. The lights came back on by themselves at sunrise. James, who was 14 and had always been the skeptic of the family, started experiencing things too. He came into my room one night, his face ashen. "I saw them," he said quietly. The red eyes. They were watching me from inside my closet. Having him confirm what Sandy and I had seen years before was both validating and terrifying. It wasn't just in our heads. Something was in that house with us. The activity escalated rapidly. Objects would move on their own, not in that subtle way where you question if you left something somewhere else. but dramatically, right in front of us. My backpack flew off the table during dinner one night. A glass shattered in the cabinet without anyone touching it. The TV would turn on by itself, always to static. The basement became completely off limits after Mom went down there to get some Christmas decorations and came up with 3 long scratches down her back. She couldn't reach that spot herself, and there was nothing down there that could have caused those marks. They were deep enough to draw blood. The hairs in the wall returned, thicker and longer than before. They seemed to grow overnight, sometimes several inches long. Mom would cut them, patch the wall, even replaced sections of drywall, but they always came back. Always black, always coarse, always in the same spot near the stairs. Sandy started sleepwalking, something she'd never done before. We'd find her standing in front of the basement door in the middle of the night, her hand on the knob, mumbling something that sounded like a name but wasn't quite clear enough to make out. When we'd wake her, she had no memory of getting there. One particularly bad night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. It wasn't coming from any particular direction. It seemed to be all around me, like the walls themselves were talking. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was angry, desperate. The room felt ice cold despite it being summer, and I could see my breath forming clouds in front of my face. That's when I noticed Sandy wasn't in her bed. I called out for her, but got no response. Terrified, I got up to look for her, forcing myself to leave the relative safety of my bed. I found her in the bathroom, standing in front of the mirror, but she wasn't looking at her reflection. She was staring at something behind her that I couldn't see. Her lips were moving like she was having a conversation, but no sound was coming out. When I touched her shoulder, she snapped out of it and started crying. "It wants us to leave," she said between sobs. "It says this is its house." We told Mom everything the next morning. For the first time, she didn't try to rationalize what was happening. She just sat at the kitchen table, her coffee getting cold in front of her, and nodded. "I know," she said finally. "I hear it too. Every night." We started making plans to move out permanently, but it takes time to sell a house and find a new place. We had to stay for another 3 months. Those were the longest 3 months of my life. The entity, that's what we started calling it, seemed to know we were planning to leave and ramped up its activities. The red eyes appeared almost nightly now, not just in closets, but in corners of rooms, under furniture, even outside looking in through windows. The black figure became so common that we'd sometimes just acknowledge its presence with a nod, too exhausted to be properly terrified anymore. One night, about a week before we were set to move, I woke up to find Sandy standing by our window, looking out at the yard. It was around 2 in the morning. "Sandy," I whispered. She turned to me slowly, her face expressionless. "There are more of them out there," she said in a flat voice that didn't sound like her at all. "They're waiting." I got up and looked out the window. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw them. Black shapes standing perfectly still in our yard. They weren't people, they weren't animals, they were just shapes, like holes cut into reality. I pulled Sandy away from the window and took her downstairs to Mom's room. We spent the rest of the night there, lights on, nobody sleeping. The day we moved out, nothing tried to stop us. No dramatic last haunting, no doors slamming, nothing flying across the room. Just an oppressive silence that hung over the house like a fog. As we drove away, I looked back and could have sworn I saw a face in the upstairs window, our bedroom window, watching us leave. Not angry, just waiting. Mom rented the house out after that. No family lasted more than 6 months. They'd all report the same things: strange noises, unexplained cold spots, feeling watched. One family left all their belongings behind, just packed overnight bags and fled in the middle of dinner. Eventually, Mom sold the place for much less than it was worth, just to be done with it. The new owners apparently had it blessed by 3 different religious leaders before moving in. I don't know if it helped. I'm 30 now, with a family of my own, living 3 states away from Owasso. but sometimes I still wake up at 3:15 in the morning for no reason. Sometimes I think I catch glimpses of something tall and thin in my peripheral vision. And sometimes when I'm alone in a dark room, I swear I can see two faint red dots watching me from the shadows. That house marked us somehow. Whatever lived there, whatever still lives there, it isn't finished with us. I don't think it ever will be. Story 5. I still can't believe it's been 15 years since we moved into that house in Millbrook. I was 10 years old when my parents bought it. Just a normal kid excited about having a bigger bedroom in our new home. We didn't know then what we were getting ourselves into. Nobody told us about anything strange happening there before, and the previous owners seemed nice enough when we met them during the closing. Mom and Dad were just happy to find a place with enough room for all of us that they could actually afford. I remember the first few months were completely normal. We unpacked, I started at my new school, made some new friends, and everything was fine. It wasn't until we'd been there about 8 months that things started getting weird. My little brother Ethan was the first one to notice something. He was only 6 at the time. I was doing homework in the kitchen when I heard him screaming my name. Not like he was playing, he sounded genuinely terrified. I ran upstairs and found him standing in the hallway outside my bedroom door, crying his eyes out. Katie, there's a girl in your room," he kept saying, pointing at my door. I told him he was being stupid, that he was just seeing things, but he was adamant. She was standing by the window. She had glasses and brown hair to here, he said, touching his shoulders. I went in to check, of course. There was nobody there. My window was closed and locked like it always was. I told him he probably just saw my reflection or something, but he wouldn't stop crying about it for hours. He refused to go near my room for weeks after that. I didn't think much of it. Little brothers are weird, right? But then other stuff started happening. Small things at first, items that weren't where we left them, the TV turning on by itself in the middle of the night. My mum blamed faulty wiring. My dad said it was just an old house settling. About a year after we moved in, I switched bedrooms with my older sister Jenna. She wanted the bigger room upstairs, and I was kind of excited about having the partially underground room on the lower level. It had this cool built-in desk, and I thought it would be nice to have more privacy. That's when things really picked up. The first night in my new room, I was trying to fall asleep when I heard it. Distinct knocking on my window, 3 clear knocks like someone using their knuckles. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. My window was small and high up on the wall since the room was partially underground. There was no way anyone could reach it from outside unless they were standing on something tall, and even then they'd have to be in our backyard, which was fenced in. I pulled the blankets over my head like any scared kid would do and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I told Jenna about it, but she just laughed and said I was making it up because I regretted switching rooms. She didn't believe me until it happened again when she was there. We were hanging out in my room about a week later, just talking about school stuff, when the knocking started again. 3 clear knocks. Tap, 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 then again, tap, tap, tap. Jenna's face went white. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. "That's what I've been talking about," I said. "It happens at night sometimes." We both stared at the window. There was nothing there. No birds, no tree branches that could be hitting it. Nothing. "It's probably just the pipes or something," Jenna said, but I could tell she didn't believe it. She left my room pretty quickly after that, but the knocking wasn't the only thing. One afternoon I was doing homework on my bed and I had papers spread out all around me. I glanced up from my textbook and saw the papers rustling. Not like when air blows through a room. They were moving like someone was running their hand over them. At first I thought it was our cat Baxter, but then I realized he was curled up right beside me, fast asleep. The papers kept moving for a few more seconds and then just stopped. I told Jenna about it that night, and that's when she finally admitted she'd experienced weird stuff in that room too. She said sometimes her pencils would roll off her desk or even fly off shelves, like someone had knocked them. She'd hear whispers when no one was home. She said she hadn't told anyone because she thought Mom and Dad would think she was making it up. Over the next few years, this kind of stuff just became our normal. Kitchen cabinets would be open in the morning that we knew we'd closed the night before. Doors would open and close on their own. The TV would turn on and off randomly. We all noticed it, even my parents, though they tried to rationalize everything. Eventually, we just started calling our ghost Rosie. I don't even remember who came up with the name. I think it was Jenna, but it stuck. Somehow, giving it a name made it less scary. It was just Rosie, our weird housemate who liked to mess with us sometimes. One time when I was about 13, I was watching TV alone. The cable box suddenly turned off in the middle of my show. I was so used to weird stuff by then that I just sighed and said out loud, "Come on, Rosie, turn it back on." And it did. The cable box started to boot up immediately. I sat there staring at it, feeling a chill run down my spine. That was the first time it felt like whatever was in our house was actually listening to us, was aware of us, could understand what we were saying. I didn't tell anyone about that for a few days. When I finally told Jenna, she admitted she'd had similar experiences. She'd asked Rosie to stop hiding her stuff, and mysteriously her missing bracelet or homework would reappear on her desk. Things calmed down a bit as we got older. The activity seemed to come in waves. Sometimes months would go by with nothing unusual happening. Then suddenly, we'd have a week where something weird would happen every day. We kind of got used to it, as crazy as that sounds. When I was 19, I was still living at home while going to community college. My boyfriend Matt moved in with us temporarily while he was between apartments. He didn't believe any of our ghost stories, of course. He'd laugh when we'd blame something on Rosie. "You guys are so gullible," he'd say. "There's always a logical explanation." Matt had been staying with us for about 2 weeks when it happened. We were in my room, the same partially underground room I'd had since I was 11. Ethan was 14 by then and had outgrown his fear of the house. He'd given Matt one of his old toy robots that made noise when you pressed buttons on it. It was sitting on my dresser. We were watching a movie on my laptop when the toy suddenly lit up and started making noise. Neither of us was anywhere near it. "Battery's probably dying," Matt said, getting up to turn it off. 10 minutes later, it happened again. The toy lit up and started saying, "Hello, friend, let's play." Matt turned it off again, looking slightly less confident. When it happened a third time, about 20 minutes later, Matt got annoyed. He walked over to the dresser and actually said to the toy, "Shut the fuck up." The toy immediately responded with its pre-programmed bye-bye phrase and went silent. We looked at each other. Even Matt seemed unnerved. "Coincidence," he muttered, putting the toy in a drawer. That night, we were almost asleep when we heard a loud thump from the corner of the room. It was so loud and sudden that we both sat straight up. It sounded like someone had dropped a heavy book on the floor. "What was that?" Matt whispered. I turned on the light. There was nothing there. Nothing had fallen. Nothing was out of place. "Probably just the house settling," I said, using my dad's old explanation. Matt didn't respond. He just stared at that corner of the room for a long time. Then he got up, grabbed his pillow, and said, "I'm going to sleep on the couch tonight." He didn't come back to my room for 3 days. When he finally did, he made me promise to get rid of that toy. I did, but it didn't matter. Whatever Rosie was, she didn't like Matt. His keys would go missing. His phone would die even when it was fully charged. The shower would run cold only when he was in it. After a month, Matt found his apartment and moved out. We broke up not long after that. He never admitted he believed in Rosie, but he also never spent another night in our house. My family still lives in that house. I moved out a few years ago, but according to my mom, Rosie is still there. The activity has lessened over time, but every once in a while something unexplainable still happens. A picture frame will turn around backward, the garage door will open on its own, the smell of flowers will appear in a room with no plants or perfume. I've tried researching the history of the house, but there's no record of anyone named Rosie ever living or dying there. No tragic accidents, no unexplained deaths. It's just a normal house in a normal neighborhood that happens to have something not normal living in it. Sometimes I wonder if Rosie followed me when I moved out. There have been a few times in my apartment when I've lost something and found it in a place I know I didn't put it. Times when I've heard knocking, but no one was at the door. Once I even thought I saw a girl with shoulder-length hair and glasses reflected in my bedroom mirror, but when I turned around, no one was there. I don't know what Rosie is or why she chose our house. I don't know if she's still there or if she's with me now. All I know is that 15 years later, I still sometimes find myself saying, "Good night, Rosie," before I turn off the lights, just in case she's listening. Story 6. I've been debating whether to post this for weeks now. I'm not typically one for sharing personal stuff online, but I need to get this off my chest, and my girlfriend is tired of hearing me talk about it. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can offer some explanation that makes sense. This happened about 6 weeks ago when my buddy Jason and I went on our annual winter camping trip in northern Saskatchewan. We've been doing these trips for years, usually just a long weekend where we disconnect from everything, drink some beers around a campfire, and enjoy the solitude. Jason's the more experienced outdoorsman between us, but I've always held my own. This particular weekend, we'd hiked about 11 kilometers into the boreal forest, well off any marked trails. The weather forecast had been decent, cold but clear skies, with maybe light snow on the second night. Nothing we hadn't handled before. The first day went perfectly. We set up camp near a small frozen lake, got the tent situated on level ground, and spent the afternoon ice fishing. By early evening, we had a good fire going and were just relaxing, passing a flask back and forth and bullshitting about work and life. Around 7 o'clock, Jason mentioned we should gather more firewood before it got too dark. The temperature was dropping fast, probably around -15 Celsius by that point, and we'd need to keep the fire going strong through the night. I volunteered to go since Jason had collected most of it earlier. I grabbed my headlamp, pocket knife, and the small hatchet we'd brought. I didn't bother with my emergency whistle or compass because, honestly, I thought I'd just be going a few hundred meters at most. Stupid mistake number one. I started off following our earlier tracks, looking for dead branches and fallen trees that weren't buried in snow. The forest was absolutely silent except for the crunch of my boots, the kind of silence you only get in winter, where it almost feels like the sound gets swallowed up. It's usually peaceful, but that night it felt, I don't know, watchful. After about 20 minutes, I realized I'd wandered farther than planned. The firewood near our camp had been picked clean, so I kept going, finding a small patch of fallen timber that looked promising. I got caught up in gathering and breaking down branches, and when I finally looked up, I noticed the sky had clouded over completely. The moon was gone and light snow had started falling. I turned to head back and immediately felt that twinge in my gut, the realization that I wasn't entirely sure which direction I'd come from. My own tracks were already getting dusted over with fresh snow, and the trees all looked the same in every direction. I had my headlamp, but in the falling snow, the beam just created this disorienting cloud of light particles in front of me. At first, I wasn't particularly worried. I figured if I just walked in the general direction I thought camp was, I'd either see the fire or could shout for Jason. But after walking for what felt like the right distance and not seeing any sign of camp, that first flutter of unease hit me. Still, I was too embarrassed to yell for help yet. I didn't want Jason to give me shit for getting lost so close to camp. So I kept walking, trying to orient myself by looking for landmarks I recognized. Another 15 minutes passed, and now I was legitimately concerned. The snow was falling heavier, I was getting cold, and I dropped most of the firewood to move faster. I pulled out my phone out of habit, but of course there was no signal. We were way too remote. That's when I finally swallowed my pride and started calling out for Jason. My voice sounded strange in the dense woods, muffled by the snow, but also weirdly amplified in the silence. I shouted a few times, waited, then shouted again. No response. I stood still, trying to quell the rising panic. Getting worked up wouldn't help. I needed to stay calm and think logically. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind picking up through the trees, but there was no breeze. The sound came again. a long, undulating wail that started low and rose to a higher pitch before falling again. It wasn't a wolf howl. I've heard those plenty of times. This was different. It reminded me of the sounds my grandmother made at my grandfather's funeral. This raw expression of grief that didn't even sound human anymore. Every hair on my body stood up. I'm not exaggerating when I say I felt a physical wave of dread wash over me. My mouth went dry instantly. I called out for Jason again, louder this time, not caring if he'd make fun of me for getting lost. The sound came again, closer this time, or at least it seemed that way. It was hard to pinpoint the direction in the snowy forest. I started walking faster, no longer concerned with finding camp so much as getting away from whatever was making that noise. That's when my headlamp caught something ahead of me, a shape perched on a large rock about 40 meters away. At first, I thought it might be Jason coming to find me, but I realized immediately this wasn't human. It looked vaguely canine in shape, but all wrong. It was too large for a wolf, maybe the size of a small bear, but with a lankier build. Its face was angular, almost triangular, with these massive eyes that were fixed directly on me. What really unsettled me was that when my headlamp beam hit those eyes, they didn't reflect light back. Anyone who's been in the woods at night knows animal eyes gleam when light hits them. It's a basic biological feature, but these eyes just absorbed the light like two black holes in its face, and it was completely, unnaturally still. Not the alertness of a predator about to pounce, but a stillness that seemed impossible for a living creature. I yelled, partly in fear and partly hoping to scare it off. It didn't even flinch. I waved my arms. Nothing. I even picked up a branch and threw it in that general direction, though not directly at the thing because something told me that would be a terrible idea. It just watched me with those eyes. They were wide and deep, and I know this will sound crazy, but I felt like they were searching me for something. Not just looking at me, but looking into me. As we stared at each other, I felt this overwhelming wave of sadness crash over me. Not fear anymore, though that was still there, but this profound grief, like I was experiencing every loss I'd ever had all at once. My dad dying when I was 14, my first serious breakup, my dog getting hit by a car when I was a kid. All these memories flooded through me with their emotions intensified tenfold. I stood there, paralyzed, as tears started streaming down my face. I wasn't sobbing or anything dramatic. The tears just came unbidden, and all the while, I felt like something was being pulled out of me, like the creature was somehow extracting these emotions, leaving me hollowed out. I don't know how long we stayed like that, probably only a minute or two, but it felt like hours. Then suddenly, I heard Jason's voice in the distance, calling my name. The creature's gaze broke from mine, its head turning slightly toward the sound. That brief moment was enough. I turned and ran toward Jason's voice, not looking back, stumbling through the snow. I kept running until I practically collided with Jason, who looked alarmed at my state. "Dude, what happened? You've been gone for over an hour," he said, steadying me. I couldn't tell him. It sounded too absurd, too crazy. So I mumbled something about getting disoriented in the snow and losing track of time. He gave me a weird look, but didn't press it. We walked back to camp together, and I kept glancing over my shoulder the entire way. Back at the campfire, I couldn't shake the feeling of hollowness. It wasn't just exhaustion or the cold. It felt like whatever that thing was had taken something from me, some essential part of my being that I couldn't quite identify. I barely slept that night, listening for that wailing sound to return. It never did. The next morning, after a quiet breakfast, I made an excuse about having stomach issues and suggested we pack up early. Jason seemed annoyed but agreed. Before we left, though, I convinced him to walk with me to where I thought I'd seen the creature. I needed to see if there were tracks or some evidence that would validate what I'd experienced. We found the rock easily enough. It was distinctive, jutting out from the forest floor, but there were no tracks in the snow around it, nothing to indicate any animal had been there at all. Jason pointed this out, looking at me strangely again, and I mumbled something about probably being in a different spot than I thought. We hiked back to the car mostly in silence. I could tell Jason was irritated that we'd cut the trip short, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I just wanted to get back to civilization, back to noise and people and light. It's been 6 weeks now, and I still can't explain what happened. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was just a stress hallucination. I had been lost, cold, and panicking, but then I remember those eyes and that feeling of something being extracted from me, and I know it was real. I've researched local folklore since then, looking for anything similar. There are some native legends about spirit beings in the northern forests, but nothing that matches exactly what I saw. The closest I've found is something called a wendigo, but that doesn't quite fit either. What haunts me most isn't the fear I felt in that moment, but the lingering sense that I'm diminished somehow. Like part of my essence is gone, taken by whatever that creature was, and I can't shake the feeling that for those few minutes I stepped outside the natural world into something else entirely, something most people never experience and wouldn't believe if you told them. I haven't been camping since, and I don't know if I ever will again. Jason has called a few times to plan another trip, but I keep making excuses. How do you tell your best friend that you're afraid of something you can't even explain? I still dream about those eyes sometimes, wide and deep like the sea, searching me for something, and in the dreams, I always hear that wailing sound, full of ancient grief, calling me back to the forest. Story 7. I never believed objects could hold negative energy until what happened 3 years ago. I was 16 then, living with my mom and stepdad in our 2-story house in Elmridge. My relationship with my stepdad, Mark, was decent. He tried to connect with me, even if his attempts sometimes missed the mark. That spring, he went to a local art fair and brought back what he thought would be the perfect gift for me. I remember the moment clearly. I was doing homework at the kitchen table when he walked in carrying something wrapped in brown paper. "Got something special for you, Cass," he said, looking genuinely excited. He propped it against the wall and carefully unwrapped it. It was a hand-painted canvas of Marilyn Monroe. Not a print, but an actual painting someone had done. The colors were vibrant, almost too vibrant. Her blonde hair was practically yellow, her lips a crimson red that seemed to pop off the canvas. Her eyes were the most striking part, crystal blue and somehow intense, like they followed you. "Thought it would look great in your room," Mark said. The artist was selling it for cheap, said it just needed the right home. I thanked him because it seemed like the right thing to do, but honestly, I felt weirdly uncomfortable looking at it. The painting was good, technically speaking, but something about it felt off. My mom, who had walked in behind Mark, visibly stiffened when she saw it. "I don't like it," she said flatly. Mark seemed hurt. "What's not to like? It's Marilyn Monroe. Cassandra loves old Hollywood." That was true. I'd gone through a classic film phase the year before, plastering my walls with posters of Audrey Hepburn and James Dean. But this painting, it wasn't the same. "It's fine, Mom," I said, not wanting to create tension. "I'll hang it up." "Thanks, Mark." My mom pressed her lips together but didn't argue further. Mark looked relieved and helped me carry the painting up to my room. We hung it on the wall directly above my bed. His suggestion, not mine. It was the obvious spot since my other walls were already covered with posters and a bookshelf. That night was when everything changed. I went to bed around 11, exhausted from studying for finals. I remember looking up at the painting before turning off my lamp. In the dim light, Marilyn's smile seemed different, less glamorous, more knowing. I dismissed the thought and fell asleep. The nightmare came almost immediately. I was in my bedroom, but everything was distorted. The walls seemed to breathe. I was lying in my bed, but I couldn't move. Completely paralyzed. I felt a crushing weight on my chest, like someone was sitting on me. I tried to scream, but couldn't make a sound. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. I could feel eyes boring into me from above. When I managed to look up, the painting had changed. Marilyn's face was decaying, her perfect skin peeling away to reveal something rotten underneath. Her eyes, though, they were alive and staring directly at me. Her mouth opened wider and wider until it was an impossible black hole. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. It took several minutes to calm down and convince myself it was just a nightmare. The painting looked normal in the morning light streaming through my window, just a colorful portrait of Marilyn Monroe. I tried to shake it off. I didn't mention the nightmare to anyone, figuring it was just stress from finals. The second night was worse. This time, I dreamed my bed was sinking through the floor. Not falling, sinking like the floor had turned to quicksand. I couldn't move as my mattress descended into the basement below. Our basement was unfinished and always dark. In the dream, it was pitch black except for a single bare bulb swinging from the ceiling. As my bed settled on the basement floor, I heard something, a scratching sound coming from the corner. Then I saw it, a small, black creature about the size of a cat, but it wasn't a cat. It had no definable shape, just darkness with limbs that moved wrong. It scuttled toward me, making a sound like labored breathing. I finally broke free from my paralysis and ran for the stairs, but they kept extending upward, getting longer with each step I took. The creature was right behind me. I could feel its cold breath on my ankles. Just before it caught me, I woke up screaming. My mom rushed into my room looking terrified. "What happened?" she asked, sitting on my bed and putting her arms around me. "Bad dream," I managed to say between gulps of air. "Really bad dream." She stayed with me until I calmed down. Before she left, she glanced up at the painting with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Maybe we should move that somewhere else," she suggested. "It's fine," I said, though I wasn't sure why I defended it. "Just a coincidence." The third night, I almost didn't want to go to sleep. I sat up reading until my eyes burned, but eventually exhaustion won. This dream was different from the others. I was standing in front of a mirror, but the reflection wasn't me. It was Marilyn, not the glamorous icon, but a hollow-eyed version with cracked skin and bleeding gums. She reached through the mirror and grabbed my wrist. Her touch was ice cold and burned like frostbite. "You hung me up," she whispered, her voice like sandpaper. "Now I'll hang you." I looked down and saw rope marks appearing on my wrists, cutting into my skin. The pain felt incredibly real. When I looked back up, my reflection had returned, but my face was blue, my eyes bloodshot, my tongue protruding slightly, like I'd been hanged. I woke up choking, my hands clawing at my throat. For several terrifying seconds, I couldn't breathe. When air finally rushed back into my lungs, I sobbed with relief. It was 5 in the morning. I wouldn't go back to sleep. I sat up in bed, keeping my back to the wall so I wouldn't have to look at the painting. When daylight finally came, I examined my wrists. There were no marks, but they ached as if bruised. That morning at breakfast, my mom commented on how terrible I looked. "I'm not sleeping well," I admitted. "Nightmares again?" she asked. I nodded, pushing my cereal around the bowl. 3 nights in a row now. My mom frowned. "Since when?" The realization hit me like a truck. Since we hung that painting. She didn't immediately dismiss the idea, which surprised me. Instead, she looked thoughtful. "Maybe it's just a coincidence," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Mom, I know this sounds crazy, but I think there's something wrong with that painting. The nightmares they're not normal. They feel real, and they're getting worse each night." I expected her to tell me I was being ridiculous, but instead she said, "I didn't want to say anything, but I got a bad feeling from that painting the moment Mark brought it home." "Why?" She shrugged. "Just a feeling, like it didn't want to be looked at." That sounded exactly right. The painting didn't want to be looked at. It wanted to do the looking. "Can we get rid of it?" I asked. "Mark paid good money for it," she said hesitantly. "He'll be upset." "Then let's test it," I suggested, the idea coming to me suddenly. "Move it to your room for a few nights. If nothing happens, I'll admit I'm being paranoid." My mom agreed, though reluctantly. When Mark left for work, we took the painting down from my wall and hung it in their bedroom. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in 3 days. No nightmares, no waking up gasping for air. I felt like myself again. The next morning, I found my mom making coffee in the kitchen. She looked exhausted. with dark circles under her eyes. "Bad night?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She nodded slowly. "I had the most disturbing dream. There were kittens in our bed, but they were sick, diseased. Their fur was falling out and their eyes were wrong. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like something terrible was about to happen. My blood ran cold. That's how my nightmares felt, exactly like that." She didn't respond, just stared into her coffee cup. The pattern continued. For 3 nights, my mom experienced nightmares while I slept peacefully. On the 3rd morning, I came downstairs to find the painting propped against the trash can and my mom on the phone with Mark. "I don't care how much you paid for it," she was saying, her voice shaking slightly. "It's not staying in this house another day." When she hung up, she told me she'd had the same dream I described, the one about sinking through the floor into the basement, being chased by a dark creature. She believed me now. "What are we going to do with it?" I asked, eyeing the painting warily. Even in the kitchen's bright light, it seemed to absorb the brightness around it. "Get rid of it," she said firmly. "Today." We didn't want to donate it. The thought of passing this curse to someone else was horrible. My mom decided she would drive it somewhere and throw it away. I offered to go with her, but she insisted I stay home. She loaded the painting into her trunk and left. When she returned 2 hours later, she looked calmer but still shaken. "Where did you take it?" I asked. "I drove about 20 miles out of town," she said. "I was going to take it to the dump, but—" She paused, looking embarrassed. I couldn't stand having it in the car that long. It felt like it was watching me through the trunk. I pulled over on a back road and left it by some garbage cans. Mark was upset when he came home and found out what we'd done, but my mom was firm. She told him about our nightmares, and though he was skeptical, he eventually let it go. We never spoke about the painting again until almost a year later, when my mom confessed something that still gives me chills. She told me that while driving with the painting in her trunk, she had to pull over 3 times because she kept thinking she heard scratching coming from behind her. The 3rd time, she couldn't take it anymore and abandoned it by the roadside. "I couldn't even make it to the dump," she admitted. "I just needed it gone." It's been 3 years now, and I still think about that painting sometimes. I wonder if someone else found it, took it home and hung it on their wall. I wonder if they're having nightmares too. I believe now that objects can carry energy, negative, dangerous energy. That painting taught me to trust my instincts. Sometimes your gut feeling about something being wrong is the only warning you'll get. I still don't know what was wrong with that painting or why it affected us the way it did. All I know is that some things aren't meant to be looked at because they're looking right back at you. Story 8. I still get chills thinking about that house. It's been 4 years since I left, but I can't shake the memories. I wasn't even going to join a sorority when I started college. I was shy, focused on my studies, and sorority life seemed like something for more outgoing girls, but my roommate Kelly wouldn't stop talking about Rush Week, so I reluctantly tagged along. That's how I ended up at the Kappa Phi Delta House, this massive southern plantation-style building that stood out from everything else in our small college town. It was beautiful in a haunting way, stark white with those imposing columns and a wraparound porch that seemed to go on forever. The second I walked up those creaking wooden steps, something felt off. Not enough to turn around and leave, but enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. The house mother, Mrs. Winters, gave us the tour. She was this older lady who'd been with the sorority for like 30 years, and she spoke about the house with this weird mix of pride and caution. "The house has personality," she kept saying, which I'd later realize was code for "this place is haunted as hell." The first floor was gorgeous. High ceilings, antique furniture, 2 spacious kitchens, 1 modern, 1 original, and a common area where the girls hung out. Everything felt normal there, bright, welcoming. But the second floor, that's where things changed. The temperature dropped the moment we climbed those stairs. The house had 8 bedrooms, 4 on each side of a long hallway, with 2 bathrooms at opposite ends. Mrs. Winters showed us each room, introducing us to the girls who lived there. Everyone seemed nice, normal, but when we got to what they called the guest room, the room that was technically part of the house but wasn't assigned to anyone, my entire body went cold. "We don't use this room much," Mrs. Winters said casually, pushing open the door. It was bare compared to the other rooms, just a twin bed, a dresser, and a small desk. No decorations, no photos, nothing personal. The window looked out onto a massive oak tree whose branches scraped against the glass. I couldn't explain it, but standing in that doorway felt like being watched by 100 eyes. "Why don't you use it?" Kelly asked. Mrs. Winters gave a dismissive wave. "The girls find it drafty." But I noticed how she didn't step into the room, how she kept one hand on the doorknob the entire time, like she needed to be ready to close it quickly. The attic was the last stop on our tour. The entrance was at the end of the second-floor hallway, a narrow door with a slide lock and a chain. "Storage," Mrs. Winters explained as she unlocked it. "Watch your step." The stairs were steep and narrow, and they groaned under our weight. The attic itself was huge, running the length of the house, with sloped ceilings and small windows at either end. But the weirdest thing, the walls were covered in cardboard, literal pieces of cardboard taped together, and every inch was written on. Names, dates, quotes, little drawings. Some of it looked decades old. "What's with the walls?" I asked, running my fingers over the cardboard. The writing was in different handwritings, different colors. "Tradition," Mrs. Winters said. "Every sister adds something before she graduates." But it felt like more than that. It felt like protection, like they were covering something up. I ended up joining Kappa Phi Delta. The girls were nice, the dues were reasonable, and despite the weird vibes I got from certain parts of the house, I liked the community. For the first month, I stayed in a temporary room on the first floor while waiting for a spot to open upstairs. My first real encounter happened when most of the sisters were away for a 3-day weekend. Only me and another girl, Amber, stayed behind because we had exams to study for. The house felt different with just 2 people, bigger, emptier, the silence more noticeable. Around midnight, we were both in the downstairs kitchen. Amber was making tea, and I was finishing a paper at the kitchen table. That's when we heard it, a loud thud from upstairs, followed by what sounded like metal dragging across the floor. We froze, looking at each other. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Amber nodded, her face pale. "Probably just the house settling." But then it happened again. Thud, scrap, and then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps crossing the floor above us. "Is someone else here?" I asked, my heart pounding. "No, everyone's gone until Monday." The footsteps continued, moving toward the staircase. Then they started coming down, slow, methodical steps, but we could see the staircase from where we sat, and there was nobody there. Nothing. Yet the sound of footsteps continued, getting closer. Amber grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Madison," she whispered. "Look." I followed her gaze to the floor near the old kitchen entrance. 2 metal baking sheets that had been on the counter were now in the middle of the floor, several feet from where they'd been. "Did you move those?" I asked. She shook her head, eyes wide. We ended up sleeping in the common room that night, back to back on the couch, too scared to go upstairs. In the morning, we laughed it off, blamed it on old pipes and drafts, but we both knew what we'd heard, what we'd seen. A few weeks later, I finally moved upstairs into a room I shared with a sophomore named Jessica. The room was across from the guest room, which still remained empty. "Nobody ever stays in there," Jessica told me when I asked. "It's bad luck. One Friday night in October, we had a sorority sleepover, just the sisters, no guests. Someone suggested we all sleep in the common room, but Ashley, our president, had another idea. "Let's all sleep upstairs tonight," she said with a strange glint in her eye. Every room, including the guest room. There was an immediate chorus of protests. "Nobody sleeps in that room. It's freezing in there." Remember what happened to Megan last year? But Ashley was insistent, and somehow I ended up drawing the short straw. The guest room would be mine for the night. Don't worry, Jessica whispered as I gathered my pillow and blanket. Just don't sleep near the window, and if you hear anything weird, come get me. The guest room was even colder than I remembered. The bed was made with fresh sheets, but they felt damp, like they'd been left out in morning dew. I pushed the bed away from the window, positioning it against the wall furthest from the closet, which for some reason gave me the creeps. I tried to sleep, I really did. But every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was watching me. Around 2 in the morning, I felt it, a tugging at the bottom of my blanket, gentle at first, then harder, like someone was trying to pull it off me. I sat bolt upright, heart racing. "Hello?" I whispered into the darkness. No answer. I convinced myself it was just my imagination and laid back down, pulling the blanket tight around me. That's when I heard the footsteps again, not downstairs this time, but in the attic. Slow, deliberate steps moving back and forth above my head, and then they were on the stairs, the attic stairs, coming down. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or call out. The footsteps reached the bottom of the attic stairs, and then, I'll never forget this as long as I live, I watched the doorknob to the attic turn. It rotated slowly, deliberately, all the way to the right, and then all the way to the left. But the door didn't open. The security chain was on. I checked it myself earlier, a small comfort in this creepy house. The doorknob kept turning, back and forth faster now, like whatever was on the other side was getting frustrated. Then it stopped. The footsteps retreated back up the stairs, and the house fell silent again. I didn't sleep a wink that night. At breakfast the next morning, nobody asked me how I'd slept. They didn't have to. The dark circles under my eyes told the story. Jessica just squeezed my shoulder and said, "Now you know." That afternoon, Ashley showed me the journal. Every Kappa Phi Delta sister since 1998 had written in it, documenting their experiences in the house. Mysterious footsteps, objects disappearing from one room and reappearing in another, furniture rearranged overnight, voices having conversations when nobody was there. One girl wrote about seeing a figure standing at the foot of her bed, watching her sleep. Another described catching glimpses of faces in mirrors that weren't her own. A third detailed how her closet door would open on its own every night at exactly 3:15, no matter how many times she locked it. The guest room had the most entries. Girls reported feeling hands on their ankles, tugging them toward the foot of the bed. One described waking up with scratches on her back. Another swore she'd been locked in from the outside, though the door had no lock, and the attic. God, the attic. That's where they'd started covering the walls with cardboard after one girl claimed to have seen writing appear on the walls overnight, old-fashioned script that warned them to get out before she returns. I stuck it out for that year because I loved the sisterhood, the community we built despite, or maybe because of, our haunted home. But after a particularly terrifying night when all 8 of us sleeping upstairs woke to find ourselves in different rooms than we'd fallen asleep in, I couldn't take it anymore. I moved out the next day. A third of the sorority followed, the rest stayed, adding their experiences to the journal, covering more walls with cardboard, developing rituals and rules to keep themselves safe. 2 years later, Kappa Phi Delta finally abandoned the house altogether. It sits empty now, its white columns turning gray with neglect, the wraparound porch sagging in places. Sometimes when I drive by, I swear I can see movement in that guest room window, the curtain pulling back slightly, as if someone's checking to see who's outside. I don't know what happened in that house before the sorority moved in. I don't know who she was or why she was coming back. All I know is that some places have memories, and that house remembered something terrible, something it couldn't or wouldn't let go of. Story 9. I've been trying to forget this for years, but lately it keeps creeping back into my mind. I'm 23 now, but I was only 10 when it happened. I still can't go camping or hike in the woods without getting this creeping sensation up my spine. I need to get this out. My parents were going through a messy divorce that summer, so I was spending a lot of time at my grandmother's place in Pinewood Valley. It was this tiny, rustic cabin set way back in the woods on about 40 acres of land. And when I say rustic, I mean rustic. No electricity, except from a generator that my grandma would run for maybe 2 hours in the evening. No indoor plumbing, no internet, no cell service, just woods, silence, and isolation. The cabin itself was this 2-room structure with a wood-burning stove and kerosene lamps. My grandma had lived there for about 15 years at that point, and she seemed totally content with the isolation. I usually stayed with her for a weekend here and there, but that summer I was there for almost 3 weeks straight. One of the worst things about staying there was the bathroom situation. There was no indoor toilet, just an outhouse that sat about 100 yards from the main cabin. During the day, it wasn't so bad walking out there, but at night, that path through the woods felt like it stretched for miles. My grandma had 3 rules about the outhouse. 1, always take a flashlight. 2, always wake her up to go with me at night. And 3, never ever go alone after dark. That night, God, I wish I could forget it, I woke up around 2 in the morning with my bladder ready to burst. I really had to pee, and I mean really had to go. I looked over at my grandma, sleeping so peacefully in her bed across the room. I didn't want to wake her. She'd been so tired lately, and I remember thinking I was a big girl who could handle a quick trip to the outhouse, so I grabbed the big metal flashlight from beside the bed, slipped on my rubber boots, and quietly unlatched the front door. The night air hit me immediately, cool and damp with that distinct smell of pine and moss. I clicked on the flashlight, and its beam cut through the darkness like a knife, illuminating the narrow dirt path that led through the trees to the outhouse. I remember how loud everything seemed. Each step I took made the gravel crunch beneath my feet. Crickets were chirping so loudly it almost hurt my ears. An owl hooted somewhere off in the distance. But underneath all those familiar sounds was this weird stillness that made my skin prickle. I was about halfway to the outhouse when I heard it. A twig snapped somewhere to my right, just off the path. I froze instantly. My heart started hammering against my ribs. In those woods, there were mountain lions, bears, and who knows what else. Grandma had warned me about them repeatedly. I stood completely still, my breath caught in my throat. Another snap, closer this time. Something was definitely there, moving through the underbrush. My hands were shaking so badly that the flashlight beam wobbled across the trees. I slowly turned the light toward the sound, expecting to see the glowing eyes of some predator reflecting back at me. What I saw instead made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't an animal, it was a person, but not really a person. More like someone had taken a human shape and twisted it all wrong. This thing was standing about 15 feet away, partially hidden behind a pine tree. It had the basic shape of a man, but its proportions were all distorted. Its legs were planted wide apart, like it was bracing itself, but its shoulders were hunched forward at an angle that would break a normal person's back. But its face, oh God, its face. Even now, 13 years later, I can see it perfectly. The skin was pale, almost glowing in the darkness. Its mouth was stretched into this enormous grin that literally went from ear to ear, showing too many teeth, and its eyes. They were just these black, empty holes, fixed right on me. The worst part was its neck. The head was tilted at an angle that was physically impossible, like its neck had been snapped and the head was just hanging there, upside down, but still somehow looking right at me. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, I couldn't even breathe. I just stood there, flashlight pointed at this nightmare, my entire body vibrating with terror. And then it moved. One arm, too long, with fingers that seemed to stretch like taffy, raised up and started beckoning to me, like it was inviting me to come closer. As it did this, the grin on its face grew even wider, which should have been impossible. The head tilted even further backward until it was completely inverted, the face looking at me upside down, still grinning, still beckoning. Something in my brain finally kicked in, pure survival instinct. I turned and ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. The path back to the cabin seemed to stretch on forever. The flashlight beam bounced wildly as I sprinted, illuminating random patches of trees and ground. I was sobbing, gasping for air, my lungs burning. Then my foot caught on a tree root. I went flying forward, landing hard on my hands and knees. The flashlight flew from my grip, rolling a few feet away where it came to rest with its beam pointing back toward the woods, back toward where I had just been. I scrambled to my feet, ready to keep running. When I looked at where the flashlight was pointing, my heart stopped. There it was again, the thing with the broken neck and the horrible grin. It had followed me. It was closer now, maybe 30 feet away, still beckoning with that impossibly long arm. I abandoned the flashlight. I just left it there on the ground and ran the rest of the way to the cabin in near darkness, guided only by the faint light coming from the cabin's window. I was screaming now, screaming for my grandma as I ran. I burst through the door, slamming it behind me and falling to the floor in hysterics. My grandma jumped out of bed immediately, rushing over to me. Emma, what's wrong? What happened?" She was kneeling beside me, her hands on my shoulders. I couldn't form words at first, just pointed frantically toward the door, toward the woods. Finally, I managed to choke out, "There's something out there. A man. Not a man. Something with a broken neck and a horrible smile." My grandma's face changed, not to fear, like I expected, but to something else, something like recognition. Without saying a word, she walked to the window and looked out. "Your flashlight's still out there," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I can see the beam from here." "Don't go out there," I screamed, grabbing at her nightgown as she moved toward the door. "It's out there. It's by the flashlight." But my grandma ignored me. She unlatched the door and stepped out onto the small porch. I was hysterical at this point, begging her to come back inside, but she just stood there, staring out into the darkness. I crawled to the doorway, too terrified to stand, and looked out. From there, I could see the beam of my abandoned flashlight about 50 yards away, and standing right at the edge of that beam was the crooked man, still in that impossible posture, still grinning, still beckoning. What happened next is what truly haunts me. My grandma didn't scream, she didn't run, she didn't even seem surprised. Instead, she put her hands on her hips and spoke directly to the thing, her voice firm and annoyed, like she was scolding a disobedient dog. "I told you to leave," she called out. "You're not welcome here. Scaring my granddaughter is my last straw. Leave before I make you leave." The thing didn't move at first. Its grin seemed to falter just slightly. Then slowly, it lowered its beckoning hand and took a step backward, away from the flashlight. My grandma stood her ground, continuing to stare it down. After what felt like an eternity, the thing turned and moved back into the woods, its body making these jerky, unnatural movements as it disappeared into the darkness. Only when it was completely gone did my grandma come back inside. She locked the door behind her, then went to the kitchen area and put a kettle on the wood stove as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. I was still on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. "Grandma," I whispered, "what was that thing?" She sighed heavily, sitting down at the table. "That was Martin," she said simply, as if she was talking about a neighbor or an old friend. "He used to own this land before me, hanged himself from one of the big oaks down by the creek about 20 years ago." I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. But that wasn't a person, Grandma. Its neck was broken, its face." "That's how he looks now," she interrupted, her voice matter of fact. "He chose to end his life here and now he can't seem to move on. He's been haunting these woods since I moved in. Usually keeps to himself, but sometimes he gets restless." I couldn't believe how calmly she was discussing this. "You've seen him before?" "Many times," she nodded. "He doesn't usually bother me anymore. I made it clear a long time ago that this is my home now." She poured hot water into a mug and added a tea bag. "That's why I always told you never to go out alone at night. He's drawn to new people. I didn't sleep at all that night, or the next. My parents came to get me the following day. My grandma called them and said I wasn't feeling well. I never told them what happened. I never told anyone until now. I've been back to my grandma's cabin many times since then, but I've never gone out alone after dark, and my grandma always makes sure to remind Martin that I'm family and to leave me be before the sun sets. The thing that scares me most isn't just the memory of that grotesque figure with the broken neck and the horrible grin. It's how my grandma reacted to it, like it was just an annoying fact of life, something to be managed rather than feared. Sometimes I wonder what else she knows, what else she's seen out there in those woods that would make her so unafraid of something so terrifying. Story 10. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family before. I'm still not sure how to explain what happened, and some nights when I can't sleep I keep thinking about it. It was 23 years ago now, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I was 8 years old when my parents told me we were moving. Dad had gotten a new job in Leeds, so we packed up our life in Manchester and moved to this tiny mining village on the outskirts of West Yorkshire. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and outsiders stuck out like a sore thumb. Our new house was nothing special, a modest terraced house in a row of identical brick buildings that had been built for the mine managers back in the early 1900s. When we first walked in, I remember thinking it was freezing cold, even though it was only September and not particularly chilly outside. Mum kept saying we'd get used to it, that old houses just took time to warm up. She was wrong about that. The first few weeks were pretty normal, unpacking boxes, starting at my new school, trying to make friends. I hated it at first. The other kids had their own little groups, and they all talked with thick Yorkshire accents that sometimes I couldn't even understand. I spent most of my time at home watching TV or playing with my toys. About a month after we moved in, weird things started happening. Nothing major at first, just little things you could explain away. The house never seemed to warm up properly, no matter how high we cranked the heating. My parents' electricity bills were through the roof, but the place still felt like an icebox, especially upstairs. Then there were the pictures. Mum loved hanging family photos everywhere, but they never stayed up. We'd wake up in the morning to find them on the floor, frames intact, no broken glass, just down. Dad blamed the old walls, said the plaster was probably crumbling behind the wallpaper. He hammered in stronger nails, used those special hooks designed for plasterboard, even tried those sticky strips. Nothing worked. Every few days, another picture would be on the floor. I didn't think much of it until one Friday evening in November. My parents were downstairs watching some boring grown-up show, and I wanted to watch a new cartoon video I'd gotten. We only had one telly downstairs, but there was another small one in my parents' bedroom, so I asked if I could go up and watch my video there. I remember walking up the stairs, video clutched in my hand, excited about having an hour to myself with my favorite show. I reached the top of the stairs and froze. There, hanging in the air in the hallway, were 3 dresses, my mum's dresses, dancing. Not like someone was wearing them, but like they were on invisible hangers being pushed back and forth by a breeze. Except there was no breeze. The windows were all closed. I stood there for what felt like forever, too scared to move. The dresses just floated there, swaying gently. Then I took a step forward, and they dropped to the floor in a heap, as if whatever had been holding them up just let go. I should have run downstairs screaming for my parents, but I didn't. For some reason, I just picked up the dresses, put them back in my parents' room, and went ahead with watching my cartoon. I was shaking the whole time, and the room was so cold I could see my breath, but I didn't tell anyone. I think I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, or worse, that they would, and we'd have to move again. After that night, I started noticing more things. The sound of footsteps when no one was there. Doors that I'd closed would be open when I came back. My toys would be in different positions than where I'd left them. Nothing scary, just odd. Then I got sick. It was about 3 weeks before Christmas, and I caught a nasty flu that was going around school. I had a high fever, and Mum kept me home in bed for 3 days. On the second night, I woke up around midnight feeling awful. My throat was on fire, and my head was pounding. I was about to call out for my mum when I saw someone standing in my doorway. At first I thought it was Mum checking on me. The figure was just standing there, watching, and I figured she'd heard me moving around. I closed my eyes again, trying to ignore how terrible I felt. When I opened them, the figure had moved into my room. It wasn't my mum. Standing at the foot of my bed was a woman I'd never seen before. She was tall and thin, wearing an old-fashioned dress, the kind you see in those period dramas my mum watches, with her hair pinned up neatly. She had small, round glasses perched on her nose, but the strangest thing was that she was blue. Not like she was sad or cold. She was literally blue, a pale, transparent blue, like she was made of colored glass. I could see the wall behind her through her body. I was too terrified to scream. I just lay there, frozen under my covers, as she looked at me. Then she smiled. It wasn't a scary smile. It was kind, almost maternal. She reached out as if to touch my forehead, but her hand stopped just above my skin. The air around her hand felt ice cold, but somehow comforting. She stood there for maybe a minute, just looking at me with that gentle smile. Then she turned and walked back toward the door. I thought that was it, that she was leaving, but when she reached the doorway, she stopped. Without turning around, she raised her arm and made a throwing motion toward my wardrobe. The wardrobe, this massive, heavy wooden thing that my dad had struggled to get up the stairs, suddenly lifted off the ground. It hovered for a second, then flew toward the wall. I closed my eyes, expecting a crash, but there was nothing. When I opened them again, both the wardrobe and the blue lady were gone. I screamed then. I screamed until my lungs hurt, and my parents came running in. They found me hysterical, pointing at the wall where my wardrobe should have been, except the wardrobe was still there, exactly where it had always been. They thought I was hallucinating from the fever. Dad checked my temperature, Mum got me some water and medicine, and they both sat with me until I fell asleep again. The next morning, I tried to tell them what I'd seen, but they just exchanged those worried looks parents give each other when they think their kid is either lying or going mental. Dad said it was just a nightmare brought on by the fever. Mum was a bit more understanding, but I could tell she didn't believe me either. I might have convinced myself it was just a fever dream too, if not for what happened a few days later. I was feeling better and playing outside in the small backyard when the boy from next door, Tommy, came over. We weren't really friends yet. He was a year older and thought he was too cool to hang out with the new kid, but he asked if I wanted to kick a football around. While we were playing, I worked up the courage to ask him if he'd ever seen anything weird in his house. I didn't mention the blue lady directly. I was still embarrassed about the whole thing. But Tommy stopped dead, the football forgotten. "You've seen her, haven't you?" he asked. "The blue lady." My stomach dropped. I nodded, and Tommy sat down on the ground beside me. He told me that lots of kids in the row had seen her over the years. His older sister had seen her walking through the wall between their houses when she was sick with chicken pox. A boy who used to live in our house before us had told everyone at school about a blue woman who would check on him when he had asthma attacks. According to Tommy, the blue lady only appeared to kids who were sick or scared. Adults never saw her. She was supposed to be the wife of one of the old mine managers who had lived in our row of houses back when the mine was still open. Apparently, she'd been a nurse before she got married, and she'd taken care of all the miners' children when they were ill. She died during a flu epidemic in the early 1900s, but she still checked on the children in the houses. "She threw my wardrobe through the wall," I told Tommy. He nodded like this made perfect sense. "The houses used to be connected," he said. "My dad says they knocked down walls to make them separate when the mine closed. She probably doesn't know the walls are there now." After that, I started asking around more. Not the adults. They just gave me weird looks or told me not to make up stories. But the other kids knew. Almost every kid who'd lived in our row of houses had a story about the blue lady. Some had seen her multiple times, others just once. She always appeared when they were sick or scared, and she always seemed to be checking on them. One old man who'd lived at the end of our row his whole life told me that when he was a boy, his mother had told him about the mine manager's wife who'd been so kind to all the children. Her name was Mrs. Eldridge. and she'd worn blue dresses so often that the miners' kids had called her the Blue Lady, even when she was alive. I never saw her again after that night, though sometimes when I was feeling poorly, my room would get strangely cold, and I'd feel like someone was watching over me. It was never scary after I knew who she was. It was almost comforting. We lived in that house for 3 more years before Dad got transferred again and we moved away. I've often wondered if she's still there, still checking on the sick children in that row of old mine managers' houses, still not quite understanding why there are walls where there didn't used to be. I'm 31 now with kids of my own, but I've never forgotten the Blue Lady. Sometimes when my children are sick, I find myself hoping that somewhere, somehow, she's looking out for them too. Story 11. I've never shared this with anyone outside my family. Honestly, even typing this makes my hands shake a bit. I'm not sure if posting this will help me make sense of it all, but I need to get it out somehow. I grew up in Black Ridge, a tiny town where everyone knew everyone. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened, or at least that's what adults would say, but I know different. I was 7 when it started, living in our old house on Maple Street with my parents and 2 brothers. We shared a bedroom, the 3 of us, me, Thomas, Jake, 9, and Michael, 5. Our beds were arranged in an L shape, with mine against the wall that connected to our parents' bedroom. That wall had this framed picture of Maria, some distant relative my mom was fond of. I remember it clearly, a sepia photograph of a stern-looking woman in old-fashioned clothes. Mom said she was our great-great-grandmother or something. I never liked that picture. Maria's eyes seemed to follow you around the room. The first night I saw them, I thought I was dreaming. I woke up around 3 in the morning needing to pee. As I sat up in bed, I froze. There, by the closet door, was a figure. Not really a person, more like a shadow, but standing upright, completely black, no features at all, just a human-shaped darkness, and it wasn't alone. There were others, 5 or 6 of them, walking in a perfect circle that crossed right through the wall where Maria's picture hung. They moved in complete silence, no footsteps, no breathing, just this procession. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I just sat there watching as they completed their circle over and over, passing through the wall each time. I must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I convinced myself it was just a nightmare. Kids have those, right? But the next night I woke up again. Same time, same figures, same circular path. This went on for weeks. Sometimes they'd move quickly, almost rushing. Other nights they'd barely move at all, taking what felt like hours to complete a single circle. But they were always there, and they always passed through that damn picture of Maria. I tried telling my brothers, but they never saw anything. Jake called me a baby and said I was making it up for attention. Michael was too young to understand. When I finally got up the courage to tell my parents, my dad checked the room, found nothing, and told me it was just my imagination. My mom seemed worried though, and would sometimes sit with me until I fell asleep, but the figures still came. Every single night. I started sleeping with my head under the covers, but curiosity always got the better of me. I'd peek out, and there they'd be, continuing their endless march. I became exhausted, afraid to sleep in my own bed. My grades started slipping. Teachers asked if everything was okay at home. After about 2 months of this, I broke down completely. I refused to sleep in my room anymore. I'd scream and cry when bedtime came. Eventually, my parents let me sleep on a mattress on their floor. And here's the weird part. The figures never followed me there. Whatever they were, they stayed in my bedroom, circling through Maria's picture. After 6 months of sleeping on my parents' floor, they finally got tired of it and made me move back. But the night before I was supposed to return to my room, my dad got transferred to another town for work. We moved away from Black Ridge 2 weeks later. I was so relieved. Whatever those things were, I thought I'd left them behind for good. I was wrong. We moved to Pineville, about 70 miles away. It was a bigger town, and we had a bigger house. I got to share a room with just Michael now, while Jake got his own space. Things were normal for almost 4 years. I was 11 when it happened again. I woke up in the middle of the night, but this time something was different. I couldn't move, not a single muscle. It was like I was frozen solid, but my mind was wide awake. Panic set in immediately. I tried to scream, but nothing came out, not even a whisper. That's when I saw it. Standing by Michael's bed was, I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't like the shadow people from before. This thing was massive, at least 7 feet tall and pure white, not like paper, but like bone. Its head was strange, with this orange beak that reminded me of a chicken, but larger and more angular, and its eyes, these angry, glowing orange eyes that seemed to burn into me. It was just watching Michael sleep, not moving, not making a sound, just staring down at my little brother with those terrible eyes. I wanted to warn him, to pull him away from this thing, but I still couldn't move. The best I could do was shut my eyes. When I finally gathered the courage to look again, it was still there, only now it had moved slightly, like it was leaning in closer to Michael. I squeezed my eyes shut again, counting in my head, 1, 2, 3. When I got to 30, I looked again. It had moved to the foot of the bed, another count to 30, another peek. Now it was by the dresser. With each glimpse, it had moved a little closer to the wall. Finally, on my last look, I watched as it simply passed through the wall and disappeared, just like the shadow figures used to do. The moment it was gone, I could move again. I launched out of bed and shook Michael awake, but he hadn't seen anything. I spent the rest of the night with all the lights on, sitting up against the headboard. I didn't tell my parents this time. What was the point? They hadn't believed me before. That was the last time I saw the white figure, but not my last supernatural experience. Fast forward 20 years. I'm 31 now, married with a house of my own. My mom got diagnosed with aggressive cancer last year. The doctors gave her 6 months. When she got too sick for Dad to care for her alone, we moved her into our guest room. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about those childhood experiences as she got sicker. I kept wondering if I'd see something again, those shadow figures or that white creature. But what came was something else entirely. It started about 3 weeks before she died. I'd gotten into the habit of checking on Mom throughout the night. Around 2 in the morning, I went into her room to make sure she was comfortable. She was asleep, breathing those shallow breaths that had become normal. But as I stood there, I felt something. Not a figure I could see, not a sound I could hear, just a presence. Like when you know someone's watching you, but multiply that feeling by 100. The air felt heavy, cold. I could barely breathe. Whatever it was, it felt ancient and patient. I knew instantly what I was sensing. Death itself, not violent or angry, just inevitable, searching, waiting. I backed out of the room slowly and shut the door. The feeling disappeared the moment I was in the hallway, but each night after that, when I'd check on Mom, it was there, waiting, searching, growing more insistent each time. My wife thought I was losing it from stress and lack of sleep. Maybe I was. But I know what I felt. Then, 2 nights before Mom died, I went in for my usual check. The room was empty, not physically empty. Mom was still there, sleeping. But that presence, that feeling of death searching, was gone, completely gone. The air felt normal again. I actually felt relieved, thinking maybe Mom was getting better somehow. 2 days later, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. I'm convinced now that what I felt was death looking for her. For whatever reason, it couldn't find her right away, but when it finally did, it took her quickly. I've spent years trying to make sense of all this. The shadow figures circling through Maria's picture, the white creature watching my brother, death itself hovering around my dying mother. Are they connected? Were they warning me? Or is something following my family? I still don't have answers. All I know is that these experiences were real. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't making it up. And I'm terrified of what might come next. My wife is pregnant now. Our first child is due in 3 months. I haven't told her about any of this. How could I? But every night I find myself waking up at 3 in the morning, checking the corners of our bedroom, watching for shadows moving in circles or white figures with orange eyes. I don't know if they'll come back. I don't know what they want. All I know is that I'll be watching and waiting. Story 12. I've been hesitant to share this for months now because I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. It happened back in April when I was living in Willow Creek, a pretty normal suburban neighborhood where nothing weird ever happens. Well, almost nothing. I've been practicing meditation for about 3 years now, and I'd experimented with astral projection a few times before, always intentionally, always with preparation, and usually with mixed results. For those who don't know what astral projection is, it's basically when your consciousness or spirit temporarily separates from your physical body. You can move around and see things while your body stays put. Some people think it's just a vivid dream state. Others believe it's actually your soul leaving your body. I was somewhere in the middle, curious but skeptical. That day started completely normal. It was a Tuesday afternoon around 2 o'clock. I remember because I had just finished a work from home meeting and was feeling drained. I decided to take a quick power nap before tackling the rest of my workday. I lay down on my bed, not even bothering to get under the covers since it was just going to be a short nap. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing, something I often do to help me fall asleep. I wasn't trying to astral project or anything like that. I was just trying to relax. That's when things got weird. I felt this strange tingling sensation spreading from my chest outward. If you've ever had your foot fall asleep and then the pins and needles feeling when blood flow returns, it was kind of like that, but pleasant, almost electric. My body started feeling incredibly heavy, like I was sinking into my mattress. Then, without any warning, I felt myself rising upward, not physically moving, but like something inside me was floating up. I opened my eyes, or at least it felt like I did, and saw myself still lying there on the bed. It wasn't scary at first, more like, oh, this is happening now, I guess. I'd experienced this sensation during my previous attempts at astral projection, but never without trying. Before I could even process what was happening, there was this powerful pulling sensation. It wasn't painful, but it was intense, like being sucked through a vacuum tube. Everything went dark for a moment, and then suddenly I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was hovering above what looked like a rural road at night. No streetlights, just moonlight illuminating a winding road surrounded by dense trees. I had no idea where this was. It definitely wasn't anywhere in Willow Creek. Our suburb is all manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses. This was straight-up wilderness. I was moving forward rapidly, floating about 10 feet above the road. It felt like I was being pulled by something or someone, though I couldn't see what it was. The trees were rushing by, and I could hear the sounds of the forest. Crickets, the rustling of leaves, even an owl somewhere in the distance. The sensory details were incredibly vivid, way more than any dream I'd ever had. I started to panic a little. This wasn't like my previous astral projections where I'd just float around my bedroom or maybe venture into my living room. This was something else entirely, and I wasn't in control. I remember thinking, "Okay, Madeline, stay calm." Then I spoke out loud, or whatever counts as speaking when you don't have a physical body. I want to be in control of this experience. The moment I said those words, the pulling sensation stopped immediately. It wasn't gradual. It was like hitting a pause button. I gently floated down until my feet touched the ground. The gravel of the road felt surprisingly real under my feet, crunching slightly as I shifted my weight. Now that I was standing still, I took a moment to look around. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in a silver-blue light. The air felt cool and smelled like pine and damp earth. In the distance, I could see what looked like mountains or hills silhouetted against the night sky. There were no houses, no cars, no signs of civilization at all, just this road cutting through the forest. I walked forward a little bit, testing my newfound control. It was different from walking in a physical body, lighter, almost like I was gliding. I made it about 20 steps down the road, wondering where it led, when I felt another pulling sensation. This one was different, not forward, but backward and upward, like being yanked by a bungee cord. Before I could react, everything blurred and I was suddenly back in my bedroom, but I wasn't back in my body yet. I was in this weird in-between state, still in astral form but back in my familiar surroundings. The light in my room was exactly how I'd left it, with afternoon sun filtering through my curtains. That's when I noticed him. Standing on the left side of my bed was a man I'd never seen before. He was completely bald with pale white skin, wearing light blue scrubs like a nurse or medical technician. He was just standing there, looking down at where my physical body lay on the bed. His expression was focused, clinical almost, like he was observing or monitoring something. I've experienced sleep paralysis before, and my first thought was that this might be something similar. But in sleep paralysis, you can't move, you're trapped. This was different. I could move my astral form freely, and I immediately pulled back in shock. "What the fuck?" I shouted, or at least tried to. It wasn't a physical voice, but the intention to speak was definitely there, and he reacted like he heard me. His head snapped up, and his eyes widened in what looked like genuine surprise. He clearly hadn't expected me to see him. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He started backing up toward my bedroom door, his hands slightly raised. I was terrified but also angry. This was my space, my experience, and whoever or whatever this guy was, he was intruding. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Get out of here right now." He made this strange gesture, raising both arms in a surrendering motion, and then he bowed. That's when I saw something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. As he bent forward in that bow, the space where the top half of his body had been became like a black shadow or void. It wasn't like a normal shadow cast by light. It was more like a hole in reality, a complete absence of anything. He straightened up and the shadow effect disappeared. He nodded once, almost respectfully, then turned and walked out through my bedroom door. He didn't open it, he just passed through it. I floated there in shock for a few moments, trying to process what had just happened. Who was this man? What was he doing in my room? Why did he seem so startled that I could see him? And what was that shadow thing when he bowed? I decided I needed to get back to my body immediately. In my previous astral projection experiences, returning to my physical form had always been a bit challenging, like trying to put on a tight-fitting glove. But this time it was different. I just focused on moving back toward my body and I slipped right in, like falling into water. I gasped and sat bolt upright, my heart pounding in my chest. I was sweating and disoriented, but definitely back in my physical body. I immediately looked at the clock. Only about 30 minutes had passed since I'd laid down for my nap, but it felt like hours. I jumped out of bed and checked my entire apartment, looking for any sign of an intruder, but everything was locked up tight. No doors or windows had been tampered with. There was no evidence anyone had been there besides me. What's bothered me the most in the month since this happened is how normal the man looked. He wasn't some shadowy demon or classic grey alien or anything supernatural looking. He was just a guy in scrubs. He could pass you on the street and you wouldn't look twice, except for that shadow thing when he bowed. That was definitely not normal. I've tried researching similar experiences, looking for anything that might explain what happened. Some theories about astral projections suggest that when we're in that state, we might encounter other beings that exist on different planes or frequencies. Others suggest they might be projections of our own subconscious. Neither explanation feels satisfying to me. The clinical appearance of the man makes me wonder sometimes if there's something more scientific going on, like maybe our consciousness can be monitored or observed by others when we're in certain states. But that sounds like conspiracy theory territory, and I'm not sure I want to go down that rabbit hole. I haven't tried to astral project since that day, intentionally or otherwise. I still meditate, but I'm careful not to let myself get too deep into it. I'm afraid of going back to that place, or worse, encountering that man again. What if next time he doesn't leave when I tell him to? The thing that really gets me is how shocked he looked when I spotted him, like he wasn't supposed to be seen, like I caught him doing something he shouldn't have been doing. It makes me wonder how many times he or others like him might have been there when I didn't notice. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I still feel that tingling sensation starting to spread through my body, and I immediately force myself fully awake. I've started sleeping with a nightlight, something I haven't done since I was a kid. I don't know what happened that day. I don't know if it was some kind of hallucination, a weird dream, or something genuinely supernatural or unexplainable. All I know is that it felt completely real, more real than any dream I've ever had, and the memory of that man in blue scrubs standing over my bed still makes me uncomfortable in my own home. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? I feel like I'm going crazy keeping this to myself. Story 13. I never believed in the paranormal until it started happening to me. 3 years ago, I moved into my apartment in Cedarville, and everything was normal for about 2 months. Then weird stuff started happening. At first, it was so subtle I thought I was just being paranoid. It started with breathing. I'd be lying in bed at night, scrolling through my phone before sleep, and I'd hear it, soft but unmistakable breathing right behind me. I'd whip around, heart pounding, but there was never anyone there. Just my empty bedroom staring back at me. The first few times, I convinced myself it was just the sound of my own breathing, echoing weird in the room. But then it started happening in the bathroom too. I'd be brushing my teeth or doing my makeup, and suddenly hear someone breathing right behind me. It got to the point where I'd avoid looking in the mirror, because I was terrified I'd see someone standing behind me. I started calling whatever it was Bill as a joke, like, oh, it's just Bill being weird again. Giving it a stupid name made it less scary somehow. My roommate at the time thought I was just being dramatic, and honestly, I wanted to believe her. But then I started seeing things. Tall, dark figures in the hallway, just out of the corner of my eye at first, but eventually I'd see them straight on. They were always gone when I looked directly at them, but I know what I saw. The worst was when I'd see them in my dad's room when he came to visit. He never noticed anything, but I'd see these tall shadows standing near his bed while he slept. I never told him because what was I supposed to say? Hey Dad, there are shadow people watching you sleep. About a year into this, I had a mental health crisis. Unrelated to the haunting, I had some other stuff going on, and ended up in a psychiatric ward for 2 weeks. I thought I'd at least get a break from Bill there, but on my third night, I woke up around 3 in the morning to see a tall, dark figure standing at the foot of my bed. I froze, too terrified to scream. It just stood there for what felt like forever, then seemed to melt into the darkness. The next morning, I heard 2 other patients talking about seeing someone walking the halls at night. One woman was insisting she saw a tall figure on the roof outside her window. The staff dismissed it as hallucinations, but how could 3 different people hallucinate the same thing? When I got out, things at my apartment were worse, much worse. The breathing sounds were louder, and now there was scratching inside the walls. I'd be sitting on my couch watching TV and suddenly hear what sounded like fingernails dragging across the drywall. My new roommate heard it too sometimes, but she moved out after just 3 months, said the place gave her bad vibes. No shit. Then I had another mental health episode and ended up in a different psychiatric facility. And guess what? Bill followed me there too. One night, I was in the common room trying to read, and I felt someone sit down on the couch next to me. I looked up and no one was there, but the cushion was depressed, like someone was sitting on it. I got up and ran back to my room. The next day, a male patient was transferred after he freaked out, claiming something invisible had touched his leg in the bathroom. After I got out of the hospital the second time, I moved back to my apartment. Stupid, I know, but I couldn't afford to break my lease. That's when things got really bad. I was alone a lot since I couldn't keep roommates, and Bill seemed to like that. The knocking started, 3 knocks in a row on different walls, always when I was alone. Sometimes I'd knock back, which was probably stupid, but I was trying to convince myself I wasn't crazy. I constantly felt like I was being watched. Not just the normal paranoia of living alone as a woman, but like something was actively observing me, studying me, waiting for me to let my guard down. I'd feel this overwhelming dread like I was about to be attacked, especially when I was in the shower or trying to sleep. Things started disappearing too. Not valuable stuff that a human thief would take, but random things like my water bottles. I'd leave a full water bottle on my desk at night, and by morning it would be gone. Not just moved, completely gone from the apartment. I bought a pack of 6 bottles one week, and by the end of the month they had all vanished. I started taking pictures of where I left things before bed because I thought I was losing my mind. The plumbing was the next thing to act up. I'd be in my bedroom and hear the shower turn on by itself, full blast, hot water steam pouring out. The first time it happened, I thought maybe the faucet was loose and had turned itself on somehow. But then it started happening with the sink too. I'd walk into the bathroom to find both faucets running full blast. My water bill was insane that month. About 2 years into living there, the touching started. I'd be sitting at my desk working and feel fingers brush against my arm. Or I'd be cooking and feel a hand on my side like someone was trying to squeeze past me in the kitchen. Once I was half asleep on the couch and distinctly felt someone stroke my hair. I jumped up screaming and didn't sleep for 2 days after that. I finally broke down and told my friend Maya everything. She's into spirituality and that kind of stuff. She said based on the progression, from subtle to increasingly physical and threatening, this wasn't a ghost. She said it sounded like a demon. That word made everything so much worse somehow. Ghosts are just lost souls, right? But a demon, that's something that wants to hurt you. Maya brought over some sage and tried to cleanse my apartment. We went room by room, burning the sage and telling anything negative to leave. It seemed to work for about a week. Then one night, I woke up to find all my kitchen cabinets and drawers wide open, every single one. I hadn't even been in the kitchen before bed. I'd ordered delivery and eaten in my bedroom. I consulted 3 different psychics after that. The first one refused to even enter my apartment. She got to the door, placed her hand on it, and literally backed away, saying, "I'm sorry, I can't help you with this." The second one did a full walkthrough and said she sensed multiple entities, not just one. That freaked me out even more. Had I been calling multiple demons Bill this whole time? The third psychic was more practical and suggested I try to find the history of the building. She thought maybe something traumatic had happened there. So I did some digging. My apartment building used to be a small hotel in the 1920s. It was converted to apartments in the 1970s. I couldn't find any records of deaths or violence, but the local historical society had very limited information. I tried everything I could think of. I hung crosses in every room. I'm not even religious. I played religious music 24/7 for a week. I sprinkled salt in all the doorways. I even contacted a Catholic church about an exorcism, but they require like a ton of proof and approvals from bishops or whatever. Nothing worked. If anything, Bill seemed amused by my efforts. The activity would die down for a few days after each attempt, then come back stronger, like it was toying with me. The worst night was about 6 months ago. I'd actually managed to fall into a deep sleep for once, when I was jolted awake by what felt like hands around my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I could only lie there struggling against something I couldn't see. After what felt like forever but was probably only seconds, it released me. I gasped for air and scrambled to turn on the light. My throat was red and sore the next day. That was when I realized this thing, whatever it was, wasn't just trying to scare me anymore. It could hurt me. It wanted to hurt me. I started spending as little time in my apartment as possible. I'd go to coffee shops until they closed, then go to 24-hour diners. I'd sleep at friends' houses when I could. But I always had to come back eventually. The weird thing is, it never followed me to other people's homes, only to the hospitals. It's like it was attached to me, but only in certain places. Maya's theory is that it can only manifest in places with thin barriers between worlds, which apparently hospitals have because of all the death and suffering there. Great. Last month, I was in my kitchen making dinner when all the burners on my stove turned on by themselves. Full blast. I hadn't touched the stove yet, I was just chopping vegetables. The flames shot up nearly a foot high. I ran over and turned them off, hands shaking. As soon as I turned them off, every light in my apartment went out. Complete darkness. I felt something brush against the back of my neck, and then a whisper right in my ear. Mine. I ran out of the apartment without grabbing anything. No phone, no wallet, nothing. Just sprinted down 3 flights of stairs and out onto the street in my socks. A neighbor found me having a panic attack on the sidewalk and let me use her phone to call Maya. I stayed with Maya for a week after that. When I finally worked up the courage to go back to my apartment with Maya and her boyfriend for backup, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Vegetables still on the cutting board, lights all working normally. The only difference was that every single photo I had, ones on the walls, ones in frames on shelves, even printed photos in a box under my bed, had been turned upside down. Maya helped me find a new apartment, and I moved out 2 weeks ago. I broke my lease and lost my security deposit, but I don't care. So far, there's been no sign of Bill in the new place. No breathing, no shadows, no missing water bottles. But sometimes, when I'm just about to fall asleep, I swear I can feel the mattress sink slightly, like someone's sitting on the edge of my bed. And last night, I woke up at exactly 3:15 in the morning for no reason. My new bathroom door, which I always leave open, was closed. I don't know if Bill followed me or not. I don't know what it wants or why it chose me. All I know is that I'm still sleeping with the lights on, and I still find myself holding my breath when I think I hear someone breathing behind me. Story 14. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened in our Sydney home back in 2011. It's taken me years to even type this out, but I need to share it with people who might understand or have experienced something similar. My husband Mark and I had just moved into this gorgeous beachfront property in Sydney with our 6-month-old son, Ethan. We'd saved for years to afford it, a 2-story weatherboard house with a wraparound porch and the most incredible ocean views. The real estate agent kept going on about what a steal it was for the location, but we were just excited to raise our son somewhere beautiful. The problem started about 3 weeks after we moved in. I'd set up Ethan's nursery myself. Pale blue walls, a mobile with little sea creatures hanging above his wooden cot, and a rocking chair by the window where I'd sit during night feeds. The cot itself was this massive oak thing my parents had given us, incredibly sturdy and heavy as hell. Mark and I had nearly thrown our backs out carrying it upstairs. I'd positioned it about 4 feet from the wall nearest the door, so I could easily walk around all sides to reach Ethan no matter where he'd wiggled to. The first time it happened, I thought I was losing my mind. I went in to get Ethan for his morning feed, and the cot was flush against the wall. Not just close to it, pressed right up against it. I distinctly remember standing there, bottle in hand, trying to figure out how it had moved. I called Mark in, and he suggested maybe we'd pushed it back when changing the sheets the night before. I knew we hadn't, but I didn't argue. We pulled it back to where it belonged, and I tried to forget about it. The next morning, same thing. The cot was against the wall again. This time I was certain. I told Mark there was no way either of us had moved it, and he agreed it was weird, but suggested maybe the floor was uneven and the cot was gradually sliding. Our house was built in the 1960s, so it wasn't exactly perfectly level. I wasn't convinced, but we tested his theory by putting a tennis ball on the floor. It didn't roll anywhere. By the 5th consecutive morning of finding the cot against the wall, I was freaking out. Mark tried to calm me down, saying it must be something logical. Maybe we were sleepwalking or something. I knew I wasn't. I've never sleepwalked in my life. We tried everything. We put little rubber stoppers under the legs of the cot. We moved it even further from the wall. We even set up Mark's old phone as a makeshift camera one night to see if we could catch whatever was happening. The footage showed nothing, literally nothing. The cot was in the middle of the room when we put Ethan down at 7:30 p.m. The video ran until the battery died around 2 a.m. and the cot hadn't moved an inch. But when I went in at 6 that morning, it was against the wall again. I started sleeping badly. Every creak in the house had me sitting bolt upright, convinced I was about to catch whatever was moving the cot. I'd run into Ethan's room multiple times a night, but I never once caught the cot in the process of moving. It was either where we'd left it or already against the wall. Mark was getting frustrated with my obsession. He thought I was overreacting, that there must be some simple explanation we were missing. We had a massive fight about it one night. He accused me of moving it myself to prove a point, which was ridiculous. Why would I terrify myself on purpose? That's when I decided to conduct an experiment. One night, after Mark had gone to sleep, I went into Ethan's room and moved the cot right into the dead center of the room. It was at least 8 feet from any wall. It took all my strength to shift it that far, and I nearly woke Ethan up in the process. If it moved that night, there would be no question that something weird was happening. I barely slept, listening for any sound from the nursery. Nothing. At around 5 in the morning, I must have dozed off because I woke with a start at 6:30 to Ethan crying. I rushed to his room and froze in the doorway. The cot was against the wall, the exact same wall as always. Not any of the other 3 walls, not diagonally shifted, but perfectly aligned with the wall nearest the door. I actually screamed, which made Ethan cry harder. Mark came running and found me having a complete breakdown in the middle of the nursery. I refused to put Ethan down in that room again. That night, he slept in our bed, and I started researching the history of our house online. I spent hours scrolling through old newspaper archives and local history sites. Nothing seemed unusual until I found a tiny article from 1972 about a house fire on our street. The next day, while Mark was at work, I took Ethan to the local library and asked if they had any more information about the fire. The librarian, an older woman named Patricia who'd lived in the area her whole life, got this strange look on her face when I gave her my address. "That's the old Wilson place," she said quietly. She disappeared into the archives and came back with a folder of newspaper clippings. As I flipped through them, my blood ran cold. In 1972, a young mother named Grace Wilson and her 4-month-old baby had died in a house fire at our exact address. The house had burned to the ground and been rebuilt the following year. According to the fire investigation, the blaze had started in the baby's room. The most horrifying detail was that the mother had been found clutching her baby near the external wall of the nursery, apparently trying to break through to the outside but overcome by smoke before she could escape. I felt physically sick. The wall the cot kept moving toward was the external wall of Ethan's nursery. When Mark got home, I showed him everything I'd found. For the first time, he looked genuinely disturbed. That night, we moved Ethan's cot into our bedroom and decided to contact someone who might be able to help. We found this woman, Marianne, who specialized in house cleansings. I was skeptical. I'd never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural, but I was desperate. She came the next day, walking through each room with bundles of herbs, stopping longest in Ethan's nursery. "There's a presence here," she said, standing by that same wall. "A female energy. She's not malevolent, but she's persistent." Marianne believed it was Grace Wilson's spirit, still trying to protect her baby, and now trying to protect mine. Her theory was that Grace was moving the cot to the external wall because in her mind, that was the escape route. She was trying to position Ethan closer to safety based on her own tragic experience. It made a twisted kind of sense, but it didn't make it any less terrifying. Marianne performed a cleansing ritual, burning sage and saying prayers in each room. She told us the spirit should be at peace now and the activity would stop. We thanked her, paid her fee, and hoped that would be the end of it. That night, we cautiously moved Ethan's cot back into his nursery, placing it in its original position away from the wall. I barely slept, checking the baby monitor every few minutes. Nothing happened. The cot stayed put. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe it was over. The next night, same thing. The cot didn't move. For 3 glorious nights, everything was normal. I started to relax, thinking whatever had been happening was resolved. On the 4th night, I woke up around 3 a.m. with this overwhelming urge to check on Ethan. The baby monitor showed nothing unusual, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I crept into his nursery and found the cot against the wall again. My heart sank. But something was different this time. The room was freezing cold, in the middle of an Australian summer, and there was this smell like burnt wood. As I stood there, paralyzed with fear, I swear I felt something brush past me. Not aggressively, more like someone gently moving me aside to get to Ethan. I grabbed my baby and ran back to our bedroom, waking Mark up and telling him what happened. He went to check the room but came back saying everything seemed normal. The room was warm again, no smell, nothing unusual except the position of the cot. We tried another cleansing, then another. We had a priest come bless the house. We even had a paranormal investigation team spend a night, but they captured nothing conclusive on their equipment. The cot kept moving, not every night, but often enough to keep us constantly on edge. The final straw came about 2 months later. We'd decided to move Ethan's cot into our room permanently, and were using his nursery as a storage space until we figured out what to do. One morning, I went in there to get something and found all of Ethan's toys and clothes piled against that same external wall, items we'd packed in boxes and stored on the opposite side of the room. We put our house on the market the next day. We moved out 3 weeks later, taking a significant financial hit by selling so quickly, but we couldn't stay there another night. The strangest part, on our very last night in that house, I went into the empty nursery to say a kind of goodbye, or good riddance. Standing by that wall, I suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over me, not my own, something external, and I swear I heard a woman's voice whisper, "Thank you." I never found out exactly what Grace Wilson was trying to do, whether she was protecting Ethan from a danger only she could see, or reliving her own tragedy night after night. All I know is that whatever was in that house believed it was helping us, and I still don't know whether to be grateful or terrified by that thought. We've been in our new home for years now, and nothing unusual has happened here, but I still can't bring myself to position Ethan's bed, he's much too big for a cot now, against any external wall. Some fears stay with you, rational or not, and sometimes, when I check on him at night, I still find myself whispering "thank you" to an empty corner of his room, just in case Grace followed us here. Story 15. I've never told this story to many people. Even 20 years later, I still get goosebumps thinking about my time at Inglewood. It was a beautiful Victorian building in Fulshaw Park South, right between Wilmslow and Alderley Edge. 4 stories tall with this gorgeous red brick exterior that made it look like something out of a period drama. I was fresh out of law school and managed to snag a 1-bedroom flat on the top floor. Seemed perfect at the time. The location was ideal. I could walk to the law firm in Wilmslow in about 20 minutes, and Manchester was just a short train ride away for nights out with friends. The rent was reasonable too, which was surprising given how nice the building looked from the outside. Should have been my first clue. Something wasn't right. My flat was simple enough. You'd walk in through the front door into a small hallway. On the right was the kitchen and living room, and on the left was the bathroom and bedroom. Nothing fancy, but it was my first place on my own, and I was pretty proud of it. The first few weeks were completely normal. I was busy at the firm trying to impress the partners, staying late most nights. When I was home, I'd just crash in bed or watch TV in the living room. Nothing unusual. Then things started changing. It was so gradual I didn't even notice at first. I stopped using my living room. Can't even tell you exactly when it started. I just realized one day that I hadn't sat in there for weeks. I was eating all my meals, standing up in the kitchen or sitting on my bed. When friends asked to come over, I'd make excuses to meet them somewhere else. The bathroom was next. I started leaving the door open whenever I showered. I'd stand there with shampoo in my hair, water running down my face, staring at the hallway like I was expecting someone to walk past. The weird part, I didn't even realize I was doing it until my girlfriend at the time, who later became my ex-wife, pointed it out. "Why do you always shower with the door open? It's letting all the steam out," she said one morning. I didn't have an answer. I honestly hadn't noticed I was doing it. The sleeping problems started around month 3. I'd go to bed, close my bedroom door. I always closed it. I was adamant about that. And then wake up in the middle of the night, sitting bolt upright, staring at the door, and it would be open, wide open, every single time. At first I thought maybe I was sleepwalking or something, so I started putting a chair in front of the door before bed. Next morning, chair moved, door open. I tried wedging it shut with a doorstop. Same result. Eventually, I just gave up and left it open, but that made my sleep even worse. I'd wake up 4, 5 times a night, convinced someone was standing in the doorway watching me. I remember the first time my girlfriend stayed over. Her name was Sarah. We'd been dating for a few months, but I'd always made excuses about going to her place instead of mine. Finally, she insisted on seeing where I lived. The moment she walked in, she tensed up. I watched her shoulders get tight, her smile fade. She walked through the flat, barely saying a word, just nodding when I pointed things out. "What do you think?" I asked when we'd done the grand tour, all 5 minutes of it. She hesitated, then said, "It's dark. Not like literally dark, just troublesome." That was the exact word she used. Troublesome. Not creepy or scary or anything like that. Troublesome. Like the flat was causing problems just by existing. She stayed that night but hardly slept. In the morning, she said, "I don't think I'll be staying here again." We broke up about a month later. She never said it was because of the flat, but I always wondered. By month 6, I was barely functioning. I wasn't sleeping, could barely concentrate at work, and spent as little time at home as possible. I started looking for a new place, found one quickly, and gave my notice. My last day in that flat is something I'll never forget as long as I live. It was a Saturday in October. Grey skies, chilly, typical English autumn day. I'd packed most of my stuff the night before and just had a few boxes left. The landlord was coming at noon to do the final inspection and take the keys. He was this older guy, must have been in his 70s, former RAF, always had these stories about the war that seemed to change slightly each time he told them. Nice enough, but a bit odd, called me son, even though I was 26 at the time. He arrived right on time, clipboard in hand. "Need to check the electricity meter before you go, son," he said. "Down in the basement." Now, in the 6 months I'd lived there, I'd never been to the basement, never had any reason to. The meters for the ground floor flats were down there, but mine was in a cupboard on my landing. "My meter's upstairs," I told him. He shook his head. "That's the gas. Electric's in the basement. Building regulations. Come on, won't take a minute." So we went down to the main entrance hall. There was a door on the right that I'd never paid much attention to. He unlocked it, flicked on a light switch, and we headed down a narrow staircase. The basement was cold. Much colder than it should have been, even for October. It was divided into storage sections for each flat, with chain link fencing separating the areas. The meters were on the far wall. While the landlord was writing down the readings, I wandered around a bit. My section was empty, I'd never used it, but something caught my eye. The electrical wires running along the ceiling had these patches where the rubber covering had melted, not burned, melted, like something hot had been pressed against them. And then I noticed the drawings. In my section, on the wall at about waist height, were these crayon drawings, children's drawings, stick figures mostly, but also some shapes that might have been animals or houses. I don't have kids, never had kids visit. The flat had been empty for months before I moved in, according to the landlord. "All done," he said, making me jump. "Everything look all right in your section?" I pointed at the drawings. "Were there children living here before me?" He frowned, looked at the wall, then back at me. "Not in that flat. No, not for many years." He checked his watch. "We should head back up, getting late." We locked the basement door behind us and went back to my flat. He did a quick inspection, I handed over the keys, and that was that. He left, and I started carrying my remaining boxes down to my car. It was about 10 trips up and down those stairs. By the 9th trip, I was exhausted and just wanted to be done. I had one final box, just some kitchen stuff, and was heading down for the last time. As I reached the main entrance hall, I heard it, a banging sound coming from the basement door. Not like someone knocking, but like someone was hitting something against the door from the inside. Hard, rhythmic, bang, bang, bang. I froze. The basement door was right there, maybe 10 feet away from me. The banging continued, getting louder, more insistent. Bang, bang, bang. Then it stopped. Complete silence. I stood there, heart racing, box clutched to my chest like a shield. The banging started again, but different this time, like someone was throwing their entire body against the door. The wood creaked and bulged outward with each impact. I could see the hinges straining. I don't remember dropping the box. I don't remember moving, but suddenly I was at Anne's door. She lived in the flat below mine, pounding on it with my fist. She answered, looking surprised. "Jacob, I thought you'd left already." My mind was blank. All I could think about was that I couldn't go back past that basement door alone. "I have some food left in the fridge. Thought you might want it before it goes bad." She looked confused but invited me in. I stayed for almost an hour, making painful small talk, constantly checking my watch. When I finally convinced myself that I was being ridiculous, I thanked her and left. The entrance hall was quiet. No banging. The basement door was closed, exactly as we'd left it. I grabbed my fallen box, now with a few broken plates inside, and practically ran to my car. I never went back to Inglewood. Never asked what might have been in that basement or who might have been making those sounds. The landlord had the key, and as far as I knew, no one else had been in the building at that time. Sometimes I think about looking the place up, seeing if it's still there, if other tenants reported strange things, but I never do. Some part of me is afraid of what I might find out, afraid that whatever was in that basement might somehow find me again. I still sleep with my bedroom door open. I tell my current wife it's so I can hear if our kids need anything in the night. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is that I can't stand the thought of waking up to find it open when I know I closed it, because whatever was in Inglewood might have followed me. And some nights when the house is quiet and dark, I swear I can hear banging, distant but getting closer. Bang. Bang, bang. Story 16. I still get goosebumps when I think about that night 2 months ago. I've hesitated to write this down because a part of me wants to forget it ever happened, but I can't stop thinking about it. Maybe sharing this will help me process what happened. I was driving home to Pittsburgh after visiting my sister in Philadelphia. I had left later than planned, around 9 in the evening, thinking I could make the 5-hour drive in one go. Big mistake. The route cuts through some pretty isolated parts of rural Pennsylvania, and by midnight I was starting to regret my decision. It was one of those pitch-black country nights where your headlights only illuminate about 20 feet ahead, and the rest is just darkness. No streetlights, no houses, just endless trees on both sides of the winding road. I had the radio on to keep me company, but the stations kept cutting out to static the further I drove. Around 1 in the morning, my gas light came on. I hadn't passed a town in over an hour, and my GPS showed nothing nearby. That knot of anxiety in my stomach started tightening as I watched the needle drop closer to empty. I figured I had maybe 15 miles left before I'd be stranded. Just when I was starting to panic, I saw it. A dim, flickering light in the distance. As I got closer, I could make out the words "Open 24 hours" on a sign that looked like it hadn't been properly maintained since the 90s. I've never been so relieved to see a gas station in my life. I pulled in under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the overhang. The place was ancient, one of those independent stations you rarely see anymore. The building was a small concrete block structure with grimy windows, peeling white paint, and a faded sign that read, "Pine Creek Gas and Groceries." There were no other cars around, just 2 rusty pumps standing like sentinels in the night. The pump made this awful creaking noise when I lifted it, like it hadn't been used in ages. I filled my tank, watching as the numbers on the ancient analog display clicked upward. While pumping, I noticed how unnaturally quiet it was. No insects chirping, no distant traffic, nothing but the sound of gas flowing into my tank and that buzzing light overhead. When I finished, I headed inside to pay. The bell above the door gave a sad little jingle as I entered. The interior was even worse than the outside. Yellowed linoleum floors, dusty shelves with expired products, and flickering fluorescent lights that made a constant low hum. The whole place smelled musty, like old newspapers and stale coffee. Behind the counter stood this guy, mid-50s maybe, rail-thin, with greasy grey-streaked hair hanging past his ears. He wore a faded red flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that were surprisingly muscular for how skinny he was. When he looked up at me, I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't anything obvious. He smiled and everything, but it didn't reach his eyes. They were pale blue, almost colorless, and they just studied me, like I was something interesting under a microscope. "Evening," he said, his voice raspy like he'd smoked too many cigarettes. "Just the gas." I nodded and told him pump number 2. While he rang me up, I noticed a wall behind him with all these old newspaper clippings. Couldn't read them clearly, but the headlines caught my eye. Things like "Local Man Still Missing" and "Search Called Off" made me uneasy, so I focused on paying. "Card machines down," he said, tapping the old register. "Cash only tonight." I dug through my wallet and found enough bills to cover it. As he made change, his fingers brushed against mine. They were ice cold and rough like sandpaper. I tried not to show how uncomfortable I felt. "Long drive ahead?" he asked, watching me too intently. "Just heading back to Pittsburgh," I replied, trying to sound casual. He nodded slowly. "Careful on these roads at night. People get lost. Happens all the time." I thanked him and practically ran back to my car, desperate to get out of there. But when I turned the key, nothing happened. The engine wouldn't even turn over. Just that awful clicking sound that means you're completely screwed. I sat there for a minute, trying to process my situation. It was almost 1:30 in the morning. I was in the middle of nowhere. My phone showed no service, and the only person around was that creepy attendant. After trying the ignition a few more times, I reluctantly headed back inside. The bell jingled again, and the attendant looked up, not surprised at all to see me. "Car trouble?" he asked, almost like he expected it. "Yeah, it won't start," I said. "Do you have a phone I could use, or know a mechanic who might be open?" He let out a dry chuckle. "Nearest mechanic's in Williamsport, about 40 miles east. No one's open this time of night." He paused, studying me again. "I could take a look, though. Used to work on cars before I took over this place." I didn't want his help, but what choice did I have? I nodded, and he reached under the counter for a flashlight. As we walked to my car, he started talking. "Get all kinds of folks breaking down here, middle of nowhere like this. It's a real problem. Some folks, they break down and then..." He trailed off, clicking his tongue. "They just disappear." I felt my heart rate picking up. "What do you mean, disappear?" "Oh, you know," he said casually. "People go wandering looking for help. These woods are easy to get lost in, especially at night." He gestured to the dense forest surrounding the gas station. "Some folks, they're never found." When we reached my car, he popped the hood and started examining the engine with his flashlight. His movements were methodical, almost robotic. He checked various components, muttering to himself. "Looks like your alternator's shot," he finally said. "And your battery connection's loose." He reached in and tightened something, his hands moving with practiced precision. "Can you fix it?" I asked, staying a few feet back. "Temporarily, maybe. Won't get you far, though." He straightened up and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Got a room in the back of the station. You're welcome to stay the night. I can drive you to Williamsport in the morning, get your car towed." The idea of spending the night there made my skin crawl. "I think I'll try to make it to the next town," I said. His expression changed just slightly, a tightening around the eyes. Suit yourself, he said. But it's not safe driving with a bad alternator. Could leave you stranded somewhere with no one around to help. The way he emphasized "no one around" made my stomach drop. He tried the engine, and miraculously, it started. "There you go," he said, stepping back. "But like I said, might not get you far." I thanked him, trying to hide my relief. "What do I owe you?" He waved his hand dismissively. "On the house. Just be careful out there." As I got in my car, he leaned down to my window. "You know, if you change your mind about staying, I'll be here all night. Not many folks pass through here this late." Then he added, "Some never leave." I forced a smile, thanked him again, and drove away as calmly as I could. In my rearview mirror, I could see him standing in the same spot, watching me until I disappeared around a bend. Once out of sight, I floored it. My heart was racing and I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me. The car was running rough, making concerning noises, but I pushed on. About an hour later, I came to a small town, just a handful of buildings, but there was a 24-hour diner with lights on. I pulled in, beyond relieved to see other people and cars. Inside, a middle-aged waitress with a kind face greeted me. I ordered coffee, hands still shaking as I told her about breaking down at the gas station back on Route 44. Her expression changed immediately. "Pine Creek Station, with the old guy who runs it?" When I nodded, she lowered her voice. "That place has a bad reputation. Owner's name is Gerald Mercer. Been running that station for 30 years, but he's not right. Never was, according to folks who grew up around here." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. She glanced around, then leaned closer. "People have gone missing over the years. Travelers, mostly. No one can prove anything, but..." She shook her head. "State police investigated him a few times. Never found anything solid." I felt sick. He said something about people disappearing in the woods. "Yeah, that's his story," she replied. "But those woods have been searched dozens of times. Strange how people only seem to vanish near his station." She told me that locals avoid the place entirely. Even truckers who regularly travel that route know to gas up elsewhere. As she spoke, another customer at the counter, an older man, chimed in. "My brother was a state trooper," he said. "They searched that property once, found all kinds of weird stuff in the basement. Animal bones, clothes that didn't belong to him, but nothing they could arrest him for." I sat there, coffee untouched, realizing how close I might have come to, what? Becoming another missing person? Another clipping on his wall? The waitress called her nephew, who was a mechanic, and he confirmed my alternator was failing. He replaced it the next morning, and I continued my journey home, taking a different route. It's been 2 months, and I still can't stop thinking about that night, about Gerald Mercer and his gas station in the middle of nowhere, about what might have happened if my car hadn't started again. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, thinking about those pale eyes studying me. I looked up news articles about the area after I got home. Found mentions of at least 6 people who went missing on that stretch of highway over the past 20 years, all of them travelers just passing through, all of them last seen alive at a small gas station on Route 44. I've thought about contacting the police, but what would I say? That a guy gave me a creepy vibe, that his gas station was run down, that he fixed my car? I have no proof of anything, but I know what I felt that night, and I know that if you're ever driving through rural Pennsylvania after dark and see a flickering "Open 24 hours" sign at an old place called Pine Creek Gas and Groceries, keep driving, no matter how low your gas tank is. Just keep driving. Story 17, Farmland in Cedar Creek. I was 5. And the thought of having my own room was the biggest thing in my little world. My brother was 8 then, and he was more concerned about making friends in the new neighborhood. I remember watching our house being built, piece by piece. I'd wander around the construction site holding my mom's hand, imagining where my toys would go, where I'd sleep. If only I'd known what was waiting for us. We moved in during the summer of 2001. The basement wasn't finished yet, just concrete floors, exposed beams, and those cold cinder block walls. I didn't like going down there, even before anything happened. It just felt wrong. The nightmares started about 3 weeks after we moved in. I still remember the first one so clearly, even though it was over 20 years ago. I was playing in my new room when I heard something calling my name from the basement. Not shouting, more like whispering, but somehow I could hear it over everything else. In the dream, I went downstairs, step by step, holding onto the railing because Mom always told me to. The basement lights were on, but they seemed dimmer than they should have been, and then I saw it. Standing behind one of those support beams was something. I could only see half of it, like it was hiding, playing some sick game of peekaboo. It wasn't a person. I knew that immediately. It was just black. Not like skin, more like it was made of shadows or smoke, but solid somehow. I couldn't see a face, but I knew it was looking at me. I knew it was smiling. I woke up screaming. My mom came running and held me while I cried, telling me it was just a bad dream, but it didn't feel like just a dream. It felt like a warning. About a week later, I started seeing it when I was awake. I called it the black thing because I didn't know what else to call it. It didn't look like a ghost or a monster from my books. It was just this dark shape that moved around our house, sometimes in corners, sometimes in doorways, watching. I remember one morning so clearly. Mom had walked my brother to the bus stop at the end of our long driveway. When they came back, I was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal. I looked up and saw it standing by the sliding glass door that led to our backyard. I didn't even feel scared anymore. That's how normal it had become in just a few weeks. "Mommy, do you see that black thing over there?" I asked, pointing with my spoon. My mom froze. She looked where I was pointing but saw nothing. I could tell she was scared though. She tried to act normal, but as soon as she thought I wasn't paying attention, she called my dad at work. I heard her whispering, saying I was doing it again, talking about things that weren't there. But it was there. It was always there. A few days later, I was getting ready for kindergarten. Mom was in her bedroom and I walked in to ask her to braid my hair. That's when I saw it again, standing in the corner of her room. "Mommy, that black thing is in your room," I said. I wasn't scared. It was just a fact to me by then. But my mom's face went white. She scooped me up and carried me out of the room, saying we'd do my hair in the kitchen instead. Years later, she told me she'd been convinced our house was haunted from the very beginning. She felt it too, the heaviness, the feeling of being watched. But seeing her 5-year-old daughter casually mentioning a black thing that followed us around was what really terrified her. The activity kept escalating. About a month after the first nightmare, Mom and I were in the kitchen making lunch when we heard it. Heavy boots running across the attic floor, back and forth, then pounding like someone was trapped up there and trying to get out. My mom grabbed me and ran outside, calling my dad again. He came home early and searched the entire attic. Nothing. Not even a way for animals to get in. No loose boards, no holes in the roof. Nothing. But we both heard it, clear as day. Things would move around the house. We'd put something down and find it somewhere else later. At first, my parents blamed me or my brother, but then it started happening when we weren't even home. One time, Mom put her coffee mug on the counter, turned to get the milk from the fridge, and when she turned back, the mug was on the other side of the kitchen. She was alone in the house. Glass would shatter for no reason. We'd be sitting in the living room watching TV, and suddenly we'd hear a crash from another room. We'd go investigate and find a picture frame or a glass cup in pieces on the floor. When I was around 7, I started hearing voices in my room at night. Always male, always whispering, but I could never quite make out what they were saying. I'd pull the covers over my head and squeeze my eyes shut until morning. For my 8th birthday, my parents got me an acoustic guitar. I loved it and practiced every day. But sometimes, when no one was in my room, we'd hear the sound of someone dragging a pick across the strings. That awful screeching noise that makes your skin crawl. My dad checked the guitar for loose strings, thinking maybe it was making noise on its own somehow. But it was fine. There was no explanation. We lived in that house for 7 years. 7 years of unexplained noises, moving objects, shadowy figures, and constant fear. I grew up thinking this was normal, that everyone lived with something dark lurking in the corners of their home. When I was 12, my dad got a new job, and we moved about 30 minutes away. We were all secretly relieved. Maybe whatever was in that house would stay there, and we could finally live a normal life. For a few months, things were quiet. No shadows, no voices, no objects moving on their own. We started to relax, to believe it was over. Then we moved again, this time about an hour away from the original house. And that's when we realized the truth. It hadn't been the house that was haunted. Whatever this thing was, it had attached itself to us, or more specifically, to me. The nightmares came back, but different now. I would dream about things that would happen the next day. Not major events, just small details. A friend wearing a specific shirt I'd never seen before, a pop quiz in math class, a bird hitting our living room window. I'd wake up thinking it was just a weird dream, and then it would happen exactly as I'd seen it. The worst dream happened when I was 15. I dreamed I woke up in the middle of the night to find a teenage boy sitting on the edge of my bed. He had blonde hair and these unnaturally light blue eyes. They almost glowed in the dark. He didn't say anything, just sat there staring at me with this empty expression. When I tried to scream, no sound came out. The next day I was home alone after school. My dog was lying next to me on the couch while I did homework. Suddenly she sat up, ears alert, staring at the blank TV screen. Her fur stood on end, and she started growling, low and threatening. I looked at the screen but saw nothing unusual. Then she bolted from the room, whimpering. I followed her and found her hiding under my parents' bed, shaking. She wouldn't come out for hours. That night, I kept thinking about the boy from my dream. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow connected to the black thing I'd seen as a child, like maybe that was its true form, and it had finally decided to show itself to me. The activity in our new house got worse after that. Doorknobs would rattle, one after another, like someone was going from room to room, trying to get in. Doors would open on their own, even when we'd locked them. I'd feel cold spots walking through the house, areas where the temperature would suddenly drop 20 degrees. The feeling of being watched was constant. I'd be in the shower and feel eyes on me. I'd be doing homework and hear breathing right behind me. I'd be trying to sleep and feel the mattress sink like someone had sat down next to me. My parents took me to doctors, thinking maybe I had some undiagnosed medical condition causing hallucinations. They had me tested for carbon monoxide poisoning, for temporal lobe epilepsy, for everything they could think of. All the tests came back normal. By the time I was in college, I'd learned to live with it. I didn't talk about it much. How do you casually mention to your roommate that you've been haunted by something since you were 5 years old? But it was always there, lingering in the background of my life. When I was 23, my mom convinced me to see a medium. I was skeptical but desperate for answers. The medium came to our house and immediately sensed something was wrong. She walked through each room, stopping occasionally to close her eyes and concentrate. When she got to my bedroom, she froze. "There's something attached to an object in this room," she said. "Something old, something that doesn't belong to you." We looked around, trying to figure out what it could be. My room was full of things I'd collected over the years. Books, clothes, decorations. Nothing seemed particularly suspicious. Then she pointed to the corner where an old wooden rocking chair sat. It had belonged to my great-grandmother, and my mum had given it to me when I moved back home after college. "That chair," the medium said. "There's something about that chair, and..." She paused, looking around. "There's something else too, something small, something hidden." We searched my room and found an old urn in the back of my closet. I'd forgotten it was even there. It had been my grandmother's, and after she died, no one knew what to do with it. It wasn't her ashes or anything, just a decorative urn she'd kept on her mantel. My mom had given it to me because I'd always admired it as a child. The medium insisted we remove both items from the house immediately. My dad took them to a storage unit that same day. That night, I slept without nightmares for the first time in years. The house felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. No footsteps, no voices, no shadows in the corners. It's been 5 years since we got rid of that chair and the urn. 5 years of peace after 20 years of terror. Sometimes I still catch myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that dark shape watching me from the doorway. Old habits die hard, I guess. I don't know what was attached to those items or why it chose me. I don't know if it was a ghost or a demon or something else entirely. All I know is that it's gone now, and I hope it stays that way. Sometimes I think about that first house, wondering if the new owners experienced anything strange. I've been tempted to drive by, to knock on the door and ask, but I'm afraid of what I might learn. I'm afraid that just going back there might wake something up, might remind it that I exist. So I stay away, and I pray that whatever it was, it's found peace. Because finally, after all these years, so have I. Story 18. I still can't sleep with the lights off, and it's been 3 months since that day at the Smith house. My parents think I'm just going through a phase, but they don't know what happened. Nobody does except Emily and Jake, and we barely talk about it anymore. I need to get this out somewhere though, because it's eating me up inside. I'm 12. Well, I was 12 when it happened. I turned 13 last week, but that doesn't matter. What matters is what we found in that house at the edge of Willow Creek. Everyone in town knows about the Smith house. It's this old 2-story place that's all falling apart, with vines growing up the sides and windows that look like they're watching you. My grandma used to tell me to never go near it. She said the Smith family disappeared during a thunderstorm back in the 80s. They just vanished, left their clothes, their food, their cars, everything. Nobody ever figured out what happened to them. I've always been curious about things I shouldn't be. My mom says it'll be the death of me someday. Maybe she's right. It was the second week of summer break, one of those days where the air is so thick with humidity, you feel like you're swimming. Jake had come over to my house that morning, and we were bored out of our minds. Emily joined us after lunch, and somehow we got talking about the Smith house. My brother dared his friend to go inside once, Emily said, but he chickened out at the last minute. I heard the dad went crazy and killed everyone, Jake whispered. Even though we were alone in my backyard, I rolled my eyes. That's not true. They disappeared. Same thing, Jake insisted. I don't know what came over me then. Maybe it was the boredom, or maybe something was pulling me there. We should check it out, I said. Emily's eyes went wide. Are you insane? That place is cursed. There's no such thing as curses, I said, but my stomach was already doing flips. We argued for about 20 minutes before they finally agreed. I think they were curious too, even if they wouldn't admit it. The Smith house was about a mile from town, down an overgrown dirt road that nobody used anymore. We rode our bikes there, not saying much. I remember the sound of cicadas in the trees and the feeling of sweat trickling down my back. When the house came into view, we all stopped. It looked worse up close. The white paint was peeling off in long strips, and the porch sagged in the middle like it might collapse. One of the upstairs windows was broken, with jagged glass sticking out like teeth. I don't like this, Emily whispered. I didn't either, but I couldn't back down now. We'll just look around for a few minutes, I promised. Then we'll go. We left our bikes by a tree and approached the house. The steps creaked under our weight, and I half expected the whole porch to give way. The front door had an old brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. I reached out to touch it, but before I could, the door swung open with a long, drawn-out creak. We all jumped back. It wasn't locked, Jake whispered. Maybe someone else is here, Emily suggested, glancing around nervously. Hello? I called out, immediately regretting it when my voice echoed back through the empty house. No one answered. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, Emily and Jake reluctantly following. The hallway stretched out before us, darker than it should have been in the middle of the afternoon. The air inside was stale and cold, despite the summer heat outside. Dust particles danced in the few beams of light that managed to break through the grimy windows. The living room was to our right, full of old furniture covered in sheets that had once been white but were now a yellowish gray. I pulled one off to reveal a couch with springs poking through the cushions. On the wall hung a family portrait. The glass cracked and the image faded. I could make out a man, a woman, and 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. They weren't smiling. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to a dining table where plates and cups still sat, as if the family had just gotten up in the middle of dinner. Emily wandered over to an old piano in the corner. "This is creepy. It's like they just vanished into thin air." I approached the piano, drawn to it somehow. When I pressed one of the keys, a deep, resonant note filled the room, making us all jump. Then another note played, even though I hadn't touched the keys again. "Did you do that?" Jake asked, his voice cracking. I shook my head, my heart pounding. "Let's check upstairs," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. The staircase protested under our weight with every step. Upstairs was a long hallway with doors on either side. The first room looked like it had belonged to a teenager. Posters of 80s bands on the walls, an old computer desk, clothes still draped over a chair. We moved to the next room, clearly the parents' bedroom. A layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise it looked like they might return any minute. There was even a book on the nightstand with a bookmark in it. As we turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind us. We all screamed. "Something moved!" Jake shouted, pointing to the closet. "I saw something move in there." I stared at the closet door, which was slightly ajar. "It's just the wind," I said, but there wasn't any wind. It took all my courage to cross the room and yank the closet door open. Nothing but old clothes and shoes. The next room we entered was filled with children's toys. A rocking horse, building blocks, dolls with vacant eyes that seemed to follow us. This had been the youngest child's room. A stuffed bear sat on the bed, its arms outstretched as if waiting for a hug that would never come. "Guys, I really don't like this," Emily whispered. "I feel like we're being watched." I felt it too, like eyes were on us from every corner. The room seemed to grow colder by the second. At the end of the hallway was one last door. Unlike the others, this one was closed. When I turned the knob, it felt ice cold against my palm. The room inside was different from the others. The wallpaper showed faded scenes of forests and animals that might have once been cheerful, but now looked sinister in the dim light. A rocking chair sat by the window, moving slightly back and forth. "There's no one in it," Jake whispered. "Why is it moving?" That's when we felt it, a sudden drop in temperature that made our breath visible. And then came the whispers. At first they were so faint I thought I was imagining them. "Help us." Emily grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, unable to speak. The whispers grew louder, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Help us. Please help us." I found myself walking toward the rocking chair, drawn to it like a magnet. The whispers intensified, becoming a chorus of different voices, all pleading for help. Then I felt it, a cold hand gripping my shoulder. I spun around, expecting to see Jake or Emily, but they were standing by the door, their faces white with terror. "Did one of you just touch me?" I asked, already knowing the answer. They both shook their heads. "We need to get out of here," Emily said, her voice shaking. "Now." We turned to leave, but the door slammed shut. Jake lunged for the knob, twisting it frantically. "It's stuck," he cried. The whispers became louder, more desperate. "Help us! We're trapped! Help us!" And suddenly, I understood. The Smiths hadn't left. They were still here, trapped in their own home. I don't know how I knew this, but I was certain of it. Instead of running, I turned back to face the room. The rocking chair was moving faster now, and the whispers had become so loud they were almost screams. "We acknowledge you," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "We hear you." The whispers quieted slightly. "We know you're here," I continued, my heart racing. The Smith family. We know you're trapped. The air in the room seemed to tremble. I felt a presence all around us, not threatening, but sad, so incredibly sad. "Daniel, what are you doing?" Jake hissed from behind me. I ignored him. "What happened to you?" I asked the empty room. "How can we help?" For a moment there was silence. Then the whispers returned, but they were different now, more coherent. Storm came. Lights went out. They came through the walls. Couldn't escape. "Who came through the walls?" I asked, but the voices just repeated the same phrases. The rocking chair suddenly stopped moving. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my friends shivering by the door. "We acknowledge your pain," I said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside me. "We hear you. You are not forgotten." A sigh seemed to pass through the room, a collective release of breath. The door behind us clicked and swung open slowly. We didn't need to be told twice. We ran out of that room, down the stairs, and out the front door without looking back. We didn't stop running until we reached our bikes, and even then we pedaled faster than we ever had before. When we finally stopped at the edge of town, we collapsed on the grass, gasping for air. None of us spoke for a long time. "What just happened?" Emily finally asked. I shook my head. "I don't know, but I think we helped them somehow." "Helped who? Ghosts?" Jake laughed nervously. "That's crazy." But it wasn't crazy. Something had changed in that house. I could feel it. And in the days that followed, I noticed changes in town too. People started talking about the Smiths differently, remembering them as they were in life, rather than as a spooky story to scare kids. Old Mrs. Jenkins, who runs the bakery, mentioned how Mr. Smith used to come in every Sunday for cinnamon rolls. Mr. Tanner at the hardware store recalled how Mrs. Smith had a talent for growing roses. Small memories, long forgotten, suddenly resurfacing. I've never told anyone else what happened that day. Who would believe me? But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I swear I can hear faint whispers. Not scary anymore, but grateful. And I know somehow that the Smith family is finally at peace. But I still sleep with the lights on. Some experiences change you forever. And that day at the Smith house changed me. I'm not the same kid who went looking for adventure on a boring summer afternoon. I know now that there are things in this world we can't explain. Things that exist in the spaces between what we can see and touch. I haven't been back to the Smith house. I don't think I ever will. But sometimes when I pass by on my bike, I swear the house looks different. Lighter somehow, as if a heavy shadow has been lifted from it. Emily and Jake don't talk about it. When I try to bring it up, they change the subject. Maybe they're trying to forget, or maybe they're just scared. I don't blame them, but I can't forget. And honestly, I don't want to. Because whatever happened in that house that day, whatever we encountered, it wasn't evil, it was just lost. And sometimes, being acknowledged is all anyone really needs, even after they're gone. Story 19. I've been hesitating to share this for months. Even typing it out makes my hands shake a little. I guess I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of what happened. Last winter, around mid-January, my mom and I experienced something in our house that I still can't explain. We live in Ravenwood, this small village where basically nothing ever happens. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the most exciting thing is usually when someone gets a new car or renovates their kitchen. Our house is pretty old, not ancient or anything, but it's been around since the 70s. It's a two-story with a basement, kind of tucked away at the end of a cul-de-sac with woods behind us. That evening started like any other. It was freezing outside, probably around 20 degrees, and we had about 6 inches of snow on the ground from the storm earlier that week. The sun had already set by 5:30, and everything outside was pitch black except for the streetlights and the reflection of the snow. Around 7 o'clock, Mom and I were in the living room watching some cooking competition show. We had the heat cranked up, and I remember wearing this old hoodie I've had since freshman year and thick fuzzy socks because the hardwood floors in our house get freezing in winter. Dad had taken my little sister Emma to her gymnastics practice in the city, about 40 minutes away. They'd left around 6:15, and Emma had been all excited because she was finally learning how to do a back handspring. I was half paying attention to the TV, scrolling through Instagram on my phone, when I heard it, Emma's giggle. Not just any laugh, but that specific giggle she does when she's trying to be sneaky. This high-pitched he that's honestly kind of annoying. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs, maybe the basement or the bottom of the stairs. My first thought was, why are they back already? Maybe practice had been cancelled or something. But then I remembered they'd only been gone like 45 minutes, and it takes 40 just to drive there. I looked over at Mom, and I could tell immediately from her face that she'd heard it too. She was frozen, remote control halfway to her mouth where she'd been about to turn up the volume. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, and my stomach did this weird flip. It sounded like Emma. "But they just left," Mom said. Her voice had this edge to it that I rarely hear. "They can't be back yet." We both sat there for a second, not moving. The TV kept playing, but neither of us was watching it anymore. Then we heard it again. That same distinctive giggle, definitely Emma's, definitely from downstairs. Mom muted the TV. "Emma," she called out. "Mark?" "That's my dad's name." No answer, just the hum of the heater. I told myself maybe they'd forgotten something and come back, though I hadn't heard the garage door or the front door open. Emma must be playing a prank, I thought. She loves to hide and jump out at people. "Let's go check," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. We got up and walked to the staircase that leads downstairs. The house was warm, but I suddenly felt cold all over. Mom went first, and I followed right behind her. "Emma," she called again, louder this time. "This isn't funny, honey." We were at the top of the stairs looking down into the darkness of the hallway below when we heard it. A loud, "Hey," that sounded exactly, and I mean exactly, like my dad's voice. It came from the kitchen, which is on the main floor, behind us. Mom and I both jumped and spun around. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Mark?" Mom called, her voice shaking now. Nothing, no response. "Dad?" I tried. Silence. Mom immediately pulled out her phone and called my dad. I stood there, frozen, as she put it on speaker. It rang 3 times before he picked up. "Hey, what's up?" he asked, and I could hear road noise in the background. "Are you on your way to gymnastics?" Mom asked, her voice tight. "Yeah, we just got into the city. Should be there in 10 minutes or so." "Why? What's wrong?" "Is Emma with you?" Mom asked. "Of course she is," Dad said, sounding confused. "She's right here next to me. Emma, say hi to Mom." "Hi, Mom," I heard Emma call out, her voice small and tinny through the phone speaker. Mom's face went white. We thought we heard you both in the house just now." "What? That's impossible. We've been in the car this whole time." "Someone's in the house," Mom whispered, more to me than to Dad. "I'm calling the police." "Wait, what's going on?" Dad asked, his voice rising with concern. "I'll call you back," Mom said and hung up. She immediately dialed 911, but as she was waiting to connect, we both realized something awful. If someone had broken in, they would have heard us talking. They would know we were onto them. Mom hung up before the call connected. "We need to check the house," she whispered to me. "It could be nothing. Maybe it's the TV from next door or something." But we both knew the neighbors weren't home. They were in Florida for the winter, and all our windows were closed tight because of the cold. There's no way we could have heard their TV, especially not sounding like it was inside our house. "Wait here," Mom said and ran to the garage. She came back with Dad's golf club, gripping it like a baseball bat. "Stay behind me." We went room by room through the first floor. The kitchen was empty. The dining room was empty. Dad's office was exactly as he'd left it. Nothing seemed disturbed or out of place. No doors or windows were open. Mom even checked the front and back door, both locked. "Let's check upstairs," she said. We climbed the stairs to the second floor, Mom still clutching the golf club so tight her knuckles were white. We checked my room, my parents' room, Emma's room, all the closets, even under the beds. Nothing. "The basement," I said, though it was the last place I wanted to go. Our basement is partially finished. Half of it is a TV room with a couch and some shelves, and the other half is unfinished with the washer, dryer, water heater, and lots of storage boxes. It's always cold down there, and the lighting is bad, just a few bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling. Mom went down first, one hand on the railing, the other still gripping the golf club. I followed close behind, my hand on her shoulder. Each step creaked under our weight, and I swear the temperature dropped with every step we took. At the bottom of the stairs, Mom flipped on the light switch. The bulbs flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across the basement. Everything looked normal. The TV room was empty. The laundry area was just as we'd left it earlier when Mom had put in a load of towels. We stood there in silence for a moment, listening. Nothing, just the hum of the water heater and the faint sound of the wind outside. "I don't understand," Mom said. Her voice echoed slightly in the empty basement. I know what I heard. It was Emma's laugh. "And Dad's voice," I added. I heard it too. We checked the rest of the basement, behind the couch, in the small bathroom, even in the crawl space where we store Christmas decorations. Nothing. No one. By the time we got back upstairs, I was starting to wonder if we'd both somehow imagined it, but I know we didn't. What we heard was real. Emma's giggle, clear as day. Dad's hey, in his exact voice. Mom called Dad back to tell him the house was empty. He was at gymnastics by then and said he'd come straight home afterward. Mom didn't call the police since we hadn't found any signs of a break-in. We sat in the living room waiting for them to come home, jumping at every little noise. Mom still had the golf club across her lap. We didn't turn the TV back on. "What do you think it was?" I finally asked her. She shook her head. "I don't know, Lucy. I really don't know." When Dad and Emma got home around 9:30, we told them everything. Dad checked the house again himself, even going outside to look around the perimeter with a flashlight. Nothing. No footprints in the snow besides our own. No signs anyone had been there. Emma thought it was cool. "Maybe we have ghosts," she said, all excited. She's into that kind of stuff. I normally would have rolled my eyes, but after what happened, I wasn't so quick to dismiss it. Here's the thing that makes it so freaking creepy. Whatever we heard knew exactly how Emma laughs. Not just any child's laugh, but her specific giggle that she does when she's being mischievous. And it knew exactly how my dad sounds when he calls out, "Hey!" That particular tone he uses when he wants to get our attention. It's been months now, and nothing like that has happened again. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the house, I find myself listening, waiting, and sometimes I swear I can feel something listening back. I still can't explain what happened that night. We weren't imagining things. Both Mom and I heard it clear as day. It wasn't the TV or the neighbors. It wasn't some weird echo or recording. What kind of thing can perfectly mimic the voices of your family, and why would it do that? These questions keep me up at night, and I still get goosebumps every time I think about it. I don't know if I believe in ghosts or whatever, but something was in our house that night, something that knew us, something that wanted us to hear it. And sometimes I wonder if it's still here, just staying quiet, waiting for the right moment to speak again. Story 20. I've never told this story to anyone besides my mom and a few close friends. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but I swear on everything I care about that what I'm about to share actually happened. I've spent over 20 years trying to make sense of it. I was around 5 years old, maybe 6. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in our old house in Michigan. Dad was out of town for work, and my mom was taking a nap upstairs. Nothing unusual about that day. It was fall, I remember, because I had just started kindergarten and was still getting used to the routine of school days versus weekends. Our living room had this old brown couch that faced the TV, with a big window behind it that looked out to the front yard. The room wasn't huge, maybe 15 by 15 feet, with a doorway that led to the kitchen and another that opened to the staircase. I was watching cartoons with the volume low because Mom had told me not to wake her. I remember being hungry but knowing I wasn't supposed to use the microwave without an adult. I was just sitting there, probably watching Rugrats or something similar, when I felt this pressure in the room. It's hard to explain, but it was like when your ears pop on an airplane, except it was all around me. The air felt different, heavier. I looked up from the TV, and that's when I saw it. Standing between me and the kitchen doorway was this thing, this creature. I still get goosebumps talking about it now. It was tall, impossibly tall. It had to be at least 8 feet because its head nearly touched our ceiling. It looked like a praying mantis, but not exactly. More like if a praying mantis decided to stand upright and take on a vaguely humanoid form. Its body was a pale greenish color with hints of brown, and it had these long, thin limbs that reminded me of twigs. But the thing I remember most vividly were its eyes. They were huge, bulging, compound eyes like you see on insects, but they seemed to have depth to them, intelligence. They were focused directly on me. I couldn't move. I wasn't screaming or crying. I was completely frozen. It wasn't like being scared of a spider or the dark. This was different. It was like my entire body understood I was in the presence of something that shouldn't exist, something that my young mind couldn't possibly process. The creature didn't move toward me. It just stood there, perfectly still except for these slight movements of its head, tilting slightly side to side in that way that mantises do. I remember staring at its front limbs. They were folded in front of it just like a praying mantis, but they looked strong enough to snap me in half. I don't know how long we stared at each other. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time felt strange. The TV was still on, but I couldn't hear it anymore. All I could focus on was not making any sudden movements. I was terrified that if I moved, it would lunge at me. What was strangest was that even though I was terrified, there was this weird feeling of recognition. Not like I knew this thing, but like my brain was trying to tell me this wasn't completely random. I can't explain it better than that. It was like seeing something from a forgotten dream. Eventually, I managed to break out of my paralysis. I slid off the couch slowly, my eyes never leaving the creature. Then I bolted. I ran as fast as my little legs could carry me up the stairs, practically falling several times because I was going so fast and not looking where I was stepping. I burst into my mom's room, shaking her awake. I was crying by that point, struggling to breathe. Mom was annoyed at first. She'd been working night shifts that week and was exhausted. But when she saw how terrified I was, she sat up immediately. "What's wrong? What happened?" she asked, and I just pointed downstairs, unable to form words. There's a big bug," was all I could manage to say. I know how stupid that sounds, but my child brain couldn't articulate what I'd seen. I couldn't say, "There's a giant mantis creature standing in our living room," because even I knew how crazy that would sound. Mom sighed, probably thinking I'd seen a spider or something, and trudged downstairs with me, hiding behind her. When we got to the living room, the creature was gone. The TV was still on. Everything looked normal. "Where was it?" she asked, and I pointed to the spot where it had stood. "It was really big," I insisted, "like really, really big." Mom checked around the room, looked behind the curtains, even checked under the couch to humor me. "Well, it's gone now. You're safe." I didn't go back to the living room that day. I stayed in my room, door closed, playing with Legos until dinner. Mom tried to get me to explain what I'd seen, but I was too embarrassed and confused. I just kept saying it was a giant bug, and eventually she stopped asking. That night, I made her check my room twice before bed, and I slept with my dinosaur nightlight on. For weeks afterward, I refused to be alone in the living room. I dragged my toys upstairs or asked Mom if I could watch TV in her room instead. Eventually, like most childhood fears, it faded to the background. I never forgot it, but I stopped actively worrying about it. As I got older, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a shadow from a tree outside the window. Maybe I'd fallen asleep watching TV and had a vivid dream. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild after watching something scary, though my parents were pretty strict about what I was allowed to watch. None of these explanations ever felt right, though. The memory was too vivid, too detailed. I remembered the way light reflected off its exoskeleton, the slight movements of its antennae, the stillness of the air. It wasn't like remembering a dream or an imagined scenario. It was like remembering meeting a person. I didn't think about the incident much through my teenage years. I was too busy with school, friends, and trying to figure out who I was. By college, it was just a weird memory from childhood, something I occasionally remembered when watching a nature documentary that showed insects, but nothing I dwelled on. Then, about 3 years ago, something happened that brought it all rushing back. I was at my friend Eve's apartment. We'd known each other since freshman year of college, and she'd become one of my closest friends. We were having drinks, just catching up, when the conversation turned to weird experiences. Eve mentioned she'd tried mushrooms a few months earlier with some friends at a cabin in the woods. It was mostly fun, she said, taking a sip of her wine. Colors were brighter, everything was hilarious. But then Mitch started having trouble breathing. He was panicking, which made it worse, and Rachel started freaking out too. "That sounds terrifying," I said. It was, Eve nodded. I was tripping too, but I was somehow the most functional one. I didn't know what to do. I was scared we'd have to call an ambulance, but we were in the middle of nowhere and I was worried about getting in trouble. She paused, looking uncertain. "This is going to sound completely insane," she said, "but I swear something happened. I went outside to get some air and try to think, and suddenly these beings appeared." I felt a chill run down my spine. Beings. "They looked like mantises," she said, and my blood ran cold, like giant praying mantises, but standing upright. There were 3 of them. In my head, I knew they weren't physically there, that it was the mushrooms, but they seemed so real. They told me exactly what to do to help Mitch and Rachel. I must have looked pale because Eve stopped and asked if I was okay. "What did they tell you to do?" I managed to ask. "They showed me how to help Mitch focus on his breathing, how to create a calmer environment, even suggested I make some honey tea to soothe their throats. Simple stuff, really, but in my panicked state I wasn't thinking clearly, and it worked. Within an hour, everyone was fine." I sat there, frozen, just like I had been as a child. Eve continued, "The weird thing is, it didn't feel scary. They felt, I don't know, benevolent, like they genuinely wanted to help." My hands were shaking as I set down my glass. "Eve, I need to tell you something." I told her everything about my childhood experience. As I spoke, her eyes widened. When I finished, we sat in silence for a long moment. "Do you think I just had a flashback to your story?" she asked finally. "Maybe you told me before and I forgot." "I've never told anyone that story except my mom," I said. "And I definitely never told you." We spent hours that night researching online. Turns out there are hundreds of accounts of people encountering mantis-like entities, especially during psychedelic experiences or meditation. Some people call them mantid beings and believe they're interdimensional entities or extraterrestrials. Others think they're manifestations of the subconscious or archetypes buried deep in human consciousness. None of these explanations satisfy me. I wasn't on drugs as a child. I wasn't meditating or in an altered state. I was just a kid watching cartoons on a Sunday afternoon. What freaks me out the most is that Eve's description of these beings matched what I saw perfectly, down to the way they moved their heads, and the fact that they seemed to be helping her. It makes me wonder if the one I encountered wasn't trying to scare me. Maybe it was trying to communicate something, and my fear got in the way. I still don't know what happened that day. Was it real? Was it some kind of shared hallucination that spans across time and people? Was it something my young mind couldn't process properly? I don't have answers. All I know is that 20-something years later, I still sometimes catch myself checking the corners of rooms when I'm alone, and on quiet afternoons when the light hits just right and the house settles into silence, I can still feel that pressure in the air, that sense that something is watching, waiting, trying to make contact. Story 21. I still can't sleep with the lights off. It's been 3 months since that night at the old sanitarium, and I keep replaying everything in my mind, trying to make sense of it. I grew up in Maplewood my whole life, small town Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knows your business before you do. But there are some things even the biggest gossips don't talk about. I've always been fascinated by the abandoned sanitarium on the edge of town. My grandpa used to tell me to stay away from it when I was little. Bad things happened there, Lucas, he'd say, then change the subject. No one ever wanted to talk about it, which of course made me more curious. The building has been sitting empty since the 70s. It's this massive stone structure with Victorian towers and these creepy windows that look like they're watching you. The town council keeps saying they're going to demolish it, but something always comes up. Budget issues, historical preservation debates, whatever. So it just sits there, rotting. The summer before senior year, my friends and I were bored out of our minds. Maplewood isn't exactly the entertainment capital of Pennsylvania. We'd hang out at the 7-Eleven parking lot or mess around at the creek, but by July we were desperate for something different. It was Aiden who suggested we check out the sanitarium. We were at my place playing video games and complaining about how hot it was. "We should do it tonight," he said. "Full moon, perfect time to ghost hunt." I remember hesitating. I'd wanted to explore that place for years, but now that the opportunity was right there, something felt off. Like maybe there was a reason people didn't talk about it, but then Jess called me chicken and, well, that was that. So me, Aiden, Jess, and Taylor made plans to meet up at 11 that night. I told my parents I was staying at Aiden's and they didn't question it. One benefit of being a straight-A student: people trust you. We parked about a quarter mile away and walked the rest, using our phone flashlights to navigate the overgrown path. It was mid-July, but the air felt cooler the closer we got to the building. I remember the smell, musty and metallic, like old pennies and wet cement. The fence around the property had collapsed in several places, so getting in was easy. Standing in front of the building, I felt this weight in my chest. The sanitarium was bigger up close than it looked from the road, with boarded-up windows and graffiti covering the lower walls. The front entrance had these massive wooden doors with rusted metal handles shaped like hands. "We doing this or what?" Taylor asked, trying to sound confident, but I could hear the nervousness in her voice. I pushed the door, and it opened with this awful creaking sound that made my skin crawl. We all looked at each other, and for a second I thought we were going to bail. But then Aiden switched on his headlamp and stepped inside, so we followed. The lobby was huge, with a ceiling that must have been 30 feet high. Moonlight streamed through broken windows, casting long shadows across the cracked marble floor. There was a reception desk covered in dust and bird droppings, and behind it, a wall with hundreds of little wooden cubbies, probably for patient mail or files. "Check this out," Jess said, pointing her flashlight at the wall. Someone had spray-painted "Get Out" in red, the paint dripping down like blood. We laughed it off as typical vandal stuff, but part of me wished I'd listened. We spent about an hour exploring the first floor, old examination rooms, offices with papers still scattered across the floor, a cafeteria with tables bolted to the ground. The whole time I kept feeling like we were being watched. I'd turn around quickly, expecting to see someone, but there was never anything there. "Let's check out the basement," Aiden suggested. I remember thinking it was a bad idea, but I didn't want to seem scared. The basement stairs were concrete, worn down in the middle from decades of use. As we descended, the temperature dropped noticeably. My phone showed it was 78 degrees outside, but down there I could see my breath. The basement was a maze of narrow hallways and small rooms. Some doors were locked, others hanging off their hinges. We found what must have been a storage area for medical equipment. Rusty gurneys lined up against walls, cabinets filled with ancient-looking instruments I couldn't identify. In one room there were these leather restraints attached to a metal bed frame. Seeing those made my stomach turn. "Guys, this place gives me the creeps," Taylor said. "Maybe we should head back up." That's when we heard it, this soft, mournful sound echoing through the corridors. At first I thought it was the wind somehow getting in, but then it became clearer, a woman crying. "Very funny, Jess," Aiden said, but Jess was right next to him, looking as freaked out as the rest of us. "That's not me," she whispered. The crying got louder, turning into this heartbreaking wail that made the hair on my arms stand up. We huddled together, flashlights pointing in different directions, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Then I saw her. In the far corner of the room, partially hidden by an old filing cabinet, was a woman. She was wearing what looked like a patient's gown, dirty and torn at the edges. Her hair was tangled, hanging down over her face, and her feet, I swear her feet weren't touching the ground. "Help me," she said, her voice hollow and distant. "Please help me." I couldn't move. It was like my feet were cemented to the floor. Taylor screamed and grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises. When we tried to leave, something weird happened. The room seemed to shift around us, like the walls were breathing. The exit door we'd come through was suddenly on the opposite wall. Then it wasn't there at all. The shadows in the corners grew darker, moving toward us like they had a mind of their own. All our flashlights went out at once, leaving only the dim emergency light above an exit sign. The woman's cries grew louder, more desperate. "Help me," she kept saying. "Help me find her." I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the genuine anguish in her voice, or maybe I somehow knew we wouldn't be allowed to leave until we helped her. But I took a step toward her while my friends hissed at me to come back. "How?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How can we help you?" She lifted her arm, pointing a pale finger toward a door I hadn't noticed before. It was small, almost like a closet door, with peeling blue paint. "She's waiting," the woman whispered. "She's been waiting so long." I looked back at my friends. Aiden shook his head frantically, but Jess gave me a small nod. We both moved toward the door while Taylor and Aiden reluctantly followed. The door wasn't locked. Inside was a small room that must have been some kind of isolation chamber. There was a narrow bed bolted to the floor and a tiny bathroom with no door. But what caught my attention was a shelf on the far wall. It held a few dusty books, a hairbrush with bristles missing, and a doll. The doll was small, maybe 10 inches tall, with a porcelain face that was cracked down the middle. It wore a faded blue dress with tiny flowers embroidered on the collar. Something about it felt important. I reached for the doll, hesitating before my fingers touched it. It was cold, colder than it should have been. As soon as I picked it up, a warm breeze swept through the room, ruffling my hair and sending dust motes swirling in the dim light. "Thank you," came the woman's voice, suddenly right beside me. "Now I can be free. Now we can both be free." I turned, and she was there, so close I could have touched her, but she wasn't scary anymore. Her face was younger, cleaner, with a sad smile. Behind her stood a small figure, a little girl in the same blue dress as the doll, holding the ghostly woman's hand. "They separated us," the woman said softly. "They said I was unfit. They took her away and wouldn't let me see her. She died here, alone and afraid, while I was locked in another ward. I've been looking for her for so long." The oppressive feeling that had filled the building suddenly lifted, like a weight being removed from my chest. The woman and the little girl seemed to dissolve into the air, leaving behind nothing but a lingering warmth. Our flashlights came back on, and the exit was right where it should have been. We didn't talk as we made our way out of the sanitarium. None of us could find the words. In the weeks that followed, I researched the history of Maplewood Sanitarium. I found out it wasn't just a mental hospital. It had also served as a place where difficult women were sent, often against their will. Some had been committed by husbands who wanted to remarry, others for having children out of wedlock, and some were separated from their children who were kept in a different wing of the facility. I found an old newspaper article from 1958 about a patient named Eleanor Winters, who had been committed after having a child out of wedlock. Her daughter, 4-year-old Lucy, was kept in the children's ward. The article mentioned that Lucy had died of pneumonia and that Eleanor had become inconsolable and had to be restrained for her own safety. Eleanor died 3 months later. The official cause was heart failure, but a former nurse was quoted saying she died of a broken heart. We created a small memorial for them. Nothing fancy, Just a bench in the town square with their names and a place where people could leave flowers. It felt important somehow to acknowledge what had happened, to bring their story into the light after it had been buried for so long. The town council finally approved the demolition of the sanitarium last month. Before they tore it down, I went back one last time, just to the edge of the property. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. The building didn't feel threatening anymore, just sad and empty. I still have the doll. I know that probably sounds creepy, but it doesn't feel right to throw it away. I keep it in a box in my closet. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I think I hear a child's laughter coming from that box, but it's not scary. It sounds happy. I don't know if I believe in ghosts. I don't know if what we experienced that night was real or if we somehow collectively hallucinated the whole thing. But I do know that Maplewood feels different now. The secret that nobody wanted to talk about is out in the open, and there's something healing about that. When I walk past the memorial bench, I sometimes see people sitting there, strangers usually who've heard the story from someone who heard it from someone else. They leave little offerings, flowers, teddy bears, handwritten notes. A ghost story has turned into something else, something that reminds us to remember the forgotten. I'm heading off to college next month, but part of me will always be in that basement room, facing something I can't explain. I still don't sleep with the lights off, not because I'm afraid of Eleanor or Lucy visiting me, but because there are other things in the dark that haven't found their peace yet, and honestly, I'm not sure I have either. Story 22. I still remember that old house like it was yesterday, even though it's been over 50 years now. I was only 16 at the time, visiting my aunt in Northeast Ohio during the summer of 1972. God, I wish I'd never gone there that last time. Even now, at 66, I get chills thinking about what happened. My Aunt Margaret lived in this enormous Civil War-era mansion, 3 full stories with a finished attic suite at the top. It was the kind of place that would have been beautiful once, with its intricate woodwork and tall windows. But by the time I was visiting, it just felt wrong. The whole place had this heaviness to it that's hard to explain unless you felt something similar. I'd visited a few times before, staying with my cousin Elaine, who was about my age. Each visit, I noticed more things that didn't sit right. The house had these weird secret passages built into it. Narrow corridors hidden behind bookshelves or fake wall panels that connected rooms on completely opposite sides of the house. My aunt said they were from Civil War times, for hiding runaway slaves, but I'm not sure I believed that. They felt more recent somehow. My aunt rented out rooms to people I never actually saw. I'd hear doors closing, footsteps in hallways, and sometimes voices. But whenever I asked who else lived there, Aunt Margaret would change the subject or say something vague about tenants who keep to themselves. The hallways seemed to stretch on forever, especially at night. They were always so dark. Even with the lights on, the shadows seemed deeper than they should be. The worst part was that my aunt and her 3 sisters practiced witchcraft. I know how that sounds, but I'm not exaggerating. They didn't hide it from the family, though they didn't exactly advertise it either. I'd grown up in a Christian household, and being in that place felt like I was surrounded by something that fundamentally opposed everything I believed in. You could just feel it in the air. Something was wrong with that house. I remember finding strange symbols drawn in chalk in closets or underneath rugs when I helped with cleaning. There were always odd smells, burning herbs and incense that made my head swim. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and get hit with this wall of cold air, even in the middle of summer with no air conditioning running. That final visit is the one that haunts me. My aunt and Elaine needed to run some errands in town and asked if I wanted to come along. I was tired from the bus ride the day before and told them I'd stay back and rest. I still wonder how different my life might have been if I'd just gone with them. I was in what they called the schoolroom. It used to be some kind of study or classroom back in the day, with large windows overlooking the long gravel driveway. I was watching them get ready to leave, Aunt Margaret locking the front door while Elaine waited by the car. I could see them clearly from where I stood. Elaine waved up at me through the window, and I waved back. That's when I heard it. "Hey, Sarah, come here a minute." It was Elaine's voice, clear as day, coming from the basement stairs behind me. Not shouting, just speaking in a normal tone like she was standing right there, but she wasn't. She couldn't be. I was literally watching her outside, getting into the car with my aunt. I could see her through the window, her hand on the car door handle, looking nothing like someone who had just called me from the basement. I froze. Every hair on my body stood on end. The voice had sounded so normal, so exactly like Elaine, but there was something underneath it. Something that filled me with a sense of dread I've never felt before or since. It wasn't just that the voice was impossible, it was that whatever was making that voice wanted me to come downstairs. I could feel the malevolence behind it, like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring out the window as their car pulled away down the driveway. Part of me wanted to scream, to bang on the window and beg them not to leave me alone in that house, but no sound would come out. My throat felt like it was closing up. Once their car disappeared from view, I realized I was completely alone in that massive house, alone, except for whatever had called me from the basement. I needed to get out. My money and overnight bag were upstairs in the guest room on the 3rd floor. I had 2 options: pass by the basement stairs to reach the main staircase, or take a longer route through a series of interconnected rooms that would eventually lead to another staircase at the far end of the house. The basement door was this heavy oak thing with black iron hinges. It was always kept closed, but now I noticed it was slightly ajar. Just an inch or so, but enough that I could see nothing but darkness beyond. There was no sound now, no voice calling me, just silence, which was somehow worse. I made my decision. I'd take the direct route past the basement stairs. Running through the maze of interconnected rooms would take too long, and something told me I needed to get out of there fast. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and ran. I don't think my feet have ever moved so quickly. As I passed the basement door, I felt a cold draft of air brush against my ankles, like something had reached out but just missed grabbing me. I didn't look back. I took the main stairs 2 at a time, racing up to the 3rd floor. The guest room door was closed, though I was sure I'd left it open. I hesitated for just a second before flinging it open. Everything looked normal. My small bag was on the bed where I'd left it, my wallet and bus ticket still inside. But something felt off. Had things been moved slightly? The room felt colder than the rest of the house. I grabbed my bag and my money, stuffed everything inside as quickly as I could. That's when I heard it again. "Sarah, I need your help. Please come downstairs." It still sounded like Elaine, but there was something else in the voice now. A slight echo, like 2 voices speaking in unison, almost perfectly aligned, but not quite. It was coming from the floor vent near my feet. I didn't answer. I didn't even breathe. I just backed away from the vent, clutching my bag to my chest. As I reached the doorway, I heard a sound from inside the closet, a soft scratching, like fingernails on wood. That was it. I bolted, down the hallway, down all 3 flights of stairs, not caring how much noise I made. I half expected something to grab me from behind, to pull me into one of those secret passages or down into the basement, but nothing did. I made it to the front door and fumbled with the locks. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work them. When I finally got the door open, I practically fell outside onto the porch. The summer air hit me like a blessing. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road, where I flagged down a passing car and begged the startled driver to take me to the bus station. I left without saying goodbye. I called my parents from the bus station and told them I was coming home early. I made up some excuse about not feeling well. I never told them what really happened. I never told anyone until now. The strange thing is, no one ever questioned why I refused to go back. Not my parents, not my aunt, not even Elaine. When family gatherings came up, everyone just seemed to accept that I wouldn't be visiting that house again. It was like they knew somehow, or maybe they'd experienced things themselves that they never talked about. I found out years later that the mansion was demolished in the early 90s. Some medical facility bought the land and built a new complex there. Part of me was relieved to know that house no longer existed, but another part wondered if tearing it down had really solved anything. I've spent decades trying to make sense of what happened that day. Was it some kind of trick, a recording, someone hiding in the house. None of those explanations ever felt right. Whatever spoke to me from that basement wasn't human, at least not anymore. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, because I've dreamed about what might have happened if I'd answered that voice, if I'd walked down those basement stairs. I think about all the people who rented rooms in that house over the years, people I never saw. Did they go down to the basement when called? Is that why they never appeared at breakfast or passed me in the halls? I'll never know what was in that basement. I'll never know what connection it had to my aunt's practices or the history of that old house. And maybe that's for the best. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some doors are meant to stay closed. But even after 50 years, I still check the locks on my doors twice before bed. I still avoid basement stairs when I'm alone. And I still never ever answer when I hear someone call my name from another room unless I can see them with my own eyes. Because I know what almost happened to me that summer day in 1972. And whatever was waiting for me at the bottom of those stairs, it's still waiting, somewhere, for someone who answers when called.